Just like, oh, can.
Do you want a picture of you?
Well, we only have like, yeah, well, how do we do this?
We have time. We have time. She doesn't trust me with this.
We have a friend that we go way, way, way back there.
Try not to photobomb.
There, I'll send it to Liz. Thank you.
I like seeing the past, just like,
Is it catching up?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to call to order the Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for April 14th, 2022. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. And Commissioner Kula, would you lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item C, which is calendar session. I wanted to note that I believe it's this Saturday. It's the first wildfire prevention class. I didn't write down where it is though. It's from 10 to noon, right?
I didn't open my computer because of the electromagnetic. It's from 10 to noon. If you, they ask that you register, so they make sure that there's enough room. And it's the registration is just your name and your email on the Soil Water Conservation website.
Okay, by tomorrow, I would assume.
I think they would prefer that.
So potential of numerous.
I'm
folks being
I
there?
signed up for the one in May,
Oh, okay.
and that's in Carlton.
Okay, and then I have a CV6 debate at the community center that we might be at on Monday, the 18th. I don't have a time handy for that one, but I can send that to you, Carolina. And then breakfast with the McMinnville Chamber is on the 19th at 7:30 in the morning at Michael Brook, or Michael Brook Country Club. Commissioner, anything else to add?
Nothing else, Chair.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Okay, item D is public comment. This time is reserved for public comment of any topic other than agenda items, quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. Is there any public comment either virtually or in the audience that is not related to an agenda item? Not seeing any hands up. Okay. And that brings us to our department update. We are being joined by Director Lindsay Manfred from Health and Human Services. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here in person to give you the update. I'm so excited about that. So certainly, you know, about 15 minutes to give an HHS update is no easy feat, but I'm going to kind of stick to high level stuff. And you can ask me any questions if you want more details on something, or if there's something that I don't touch on and you're hearing about and you want me to speak to it, I'm happy to. I'm going to start just giving some general updates. I'm going to talk about some of my sort of biggest challenges, concern areas, and then some exciting opportunities that we're looking forward to over the coming several months. So first update is around the Sheridan Housing Project. We are so thrilled that beginning this month, we've started moving the first group of individuals into the complex. Very exciting. So as a reminder, at the end result will be 64 units of housing in Sheridan for individuals who are somewhere along the lines of the recovery process. The first half of the building that is completed at this point is 30 units and the general community center. So all 30 units have been filled and those people are moving in, and we are continuing to keep a wait list for individuals for the second half of the project that we hope will be completed. It's hard to make a timeline estimate, but hopefully in the next several months, we'll see the second half of that complex done, which is really exciting. Another exciting new scope of work is our intensive in-home behavioral health treatment program. It's IIBHT. This is a program that's run through our Family and Youth Services. It's an evidence-based program that works with a high level of acuity when we're talking about some of the youth in our programs, and provides these intensive home services through in-home. So rather than having these youth need to come into our clinic, we're able to provide these supports in-home. And it's a team approach where they have a social worker, counselor, psychotherapist if they need that, the psychiatry component, all of these things where they're able to be in the home. It serves a small portion of our youth, around 10 to 15 families is what we have the capacity to serve. But again, this is the highest level of acuity that are really needing this level of support. But we're really excited to be bringing this because as of a few months ago, this was not an option for these families. So it's very exciting. An update on our Newburgh office. As you recall, we purchased that building last year and have been going through the renovation process. Like any renovation process, there have been a handful of delays, but not too many. And we are anticipating a move-in date mid-June. So right now we're doing all the work with county facilities and IT, just making sure that we've got all of those connections and things in place and where we want them to be. But certainly the staff are very excited to be moving into the new space, both just to have a space that is reflective of the type of space we want to be portraying to our community, but also it allows us to increase our capacity a bit. And we're really excited for that because we know that the Newburgh community needs those services. So that's really exciting. Community health assessment. We are in process of doing our community health assessment through public health. We're partnering with the CCO, who also is required to do a community health assessment, and with Providence as a nonprofit hospital, they're required to do an assessment as well. This is something that happens every 5 years, and it is quite comprehensive. It takes several months to do, and it includes both the qualitative data, so really getting information from the community. So there's a community survey that we're trying to get distributed to as many places as possible, and then we're going through and conducting a lot of listening sessions, particularly with groups that may not be able to easily access things like surveys and things of that nature. So we're gathering all of that information that will help inform sort of what the community sees as strengths, weaknesses, and areas that they really want to see shift or look different. And then, of course, there's a huge data collection component that goes into that as well, looking at everything from leading causes to death to traffic accidents, all sorts of things. So kind of everything you could imagine, we're trying to include in that so that we can really understand the status of where things are at with our community. The next phase of that project will be looking at the priorities. So synthesizing all of that data, going back to the community and saying, this is what the data is telling us. This is the information that we have. Where are your priorities? What are the things that feel most critical for you? And then working to develop plans around that. So it's an exciting process and something that again takes a lot of time, but I think at the end, it really helps us understand what's happening and where we can go forward. The last general update that I'll give is related to a data warehouse that we've been building. Some of this has been in partnership with IT and building out the Tableau system. We're very excited. This will have a couple of components for us. And the data warehouse has been completed as it relates to all of our internal data coming from our EHR and things like that. And our hope is that we're able, now that that part's complete, we'll be able to really extract data in a much more pleasing way so that we can communicate out. Right now, things are in spreadsheets and we can crunch those numbers and we get that data, but it's not an easy process. And the information that we can share out doesn't always look aesthetically pleasing to folks. And so we're really hoping to share that because one thing that we have learned over COVID is that the community really does expect a high level of data analysis from us. And we agree with that. We think that the community deserves to see this information, and we want to be able to provide it in the best way possible. So this is an exciting development for us. Of course, I don't think any HHS update would be complete if I didn't at least mention COVID, so I will do that, but I'm going to keep it really brief, which is, over the last week or so, we've seen a slight uptick in cases, although nothing that we're seeing is highly concerning from that. We anticipated that with the BA.2 variant, that there would probably be a slight uptick in cases, and that's what we're seeing. But we're monitoring that closely. At this point, we have no changes in recommendations that we're pushing out or sharing with other people, but we are watching it through our case counts. We're watching it. We have 3 communities that have wastewater that is surveyed, the McMinnville, Newburgh, and Sheridan. So we get weekly updates on that and are watching all of those things closely. A couple of the areas that I just wanted to highlight in terms of challenges or concerns or areas that are really high priorities for us right now is probably the top of my list right now is staff retention and recruitment. Certainly this is not unique to HHS, it's not unique to Oregon, it's not, this is happening everywhere. And yet we're really working hard to figure out how do we make Yamhill County different? How do we make HHS the place that everyone wants to stay, the place that people want to come? So we're working really closely with staff to identify things that we can do as an organization to really support them, make sure that they have what they need and make sure that they really want to keep coming to work with us every day. So high priority, it's a complex issue and we're doing our best to support everyone. The other one is related to syphilis, probably the only department head that is bringing that topic to you all, but it is
I think
really
so.
So far.
So far, you never know.
I was actually about to ask Dave, who's behind you, do you have, and then I stopped.
Yeah, so super concerning, and I'll just share a couple of high-level statistics. So in 2019, we had 6 cases, and over my 15 years here, we've toggled anywhere between 0 and 5 cases in a year. So we saw 6 cases in 2019. We had 15 cases in 2020, and then in 2021, we had 30 cases. Within those 30 cases last year, 2 of those ended with a congenital syphilis. So the baby was born with syphilis, which is just heartbreaking. Also last year, a neighboring county had the first syphilis stillborn death that we've had in decades. So very concerning. It's high on my list of things that we need to figure out what's going on. And again, like everything else, it's a complex topic and we're working really hard to try to figure out what's going on. I want to thank the board for approving the funds, was it last week or the week before, for additional STD support. We're really using those funds to focus in on this and understand what the issue is so that we can make sure that, one, we're tackling that and people know how to get treatment and can do that, but also that we have a goal of never having another congenital syphilis case in Yamhill County. The other really unfortunate area of concern that I have right now is around our numbers and what they're looking like for deaths by suicide. I think within HHS, we have a very robust suicide intervention prevention work that happens, and whether that's related to our behavioral health services, our crisis services, mobile crisis, 24/7 support lines, all of those things are in place. And where I'm seeing a big gap in what we have is the upstream kind of prevention efforts. I think we're really great in the prevention and postvention, but some of those, really upstream primary prevention, we don't really have a lot of resource for that. And so we're actively trying to figure out how we can better support the community in those ways. We saw a pretty steady decrease in our numbers from 2018, 2019, and even 2020, we saw a decrease, but sadly in 2021, we're beginning to see a fairly substantial increase. And so again, trying to do a deep dive and understand what's happening and make sure that we can do everything that we can to not have any of those happen in our community. And then the last challenge I'll speak to is just space. We have really tried to maximize in areas of administration and data analysis and those areas that really can function and work well remotely, really maximize that. But even with those approaches, we are sort of busting at the seams in terms of where we can put staff and those things. In addition to that, I know these are not new things for you all to hear, but the existing spaces we're finding more and more challenging. We have a building that has gone close to 48 hours without power in certain sections of it. So people are having to find outlets to plug in laptops and things of that nature. And then as we're getting ready for summer, we're getting a little anxious because we know that we have some buildings that the temperatures reach up to 100 degrees despite the best efforts. And I know facilities is working really hard. We hear them on the roof. We know that they're working on it. They're doing everything they can. We've got contractors out, but somehow the problems have just not been able to be resolved. And so we're just really in need of some supports around how we can make sure that we have a place that's comfortable for staff, but also the clients when they're coming in to get services. So I want to end with some exciting things though, because I just talked about a bunch of things that are not so pleasant, but there has been a fairly substantial investment from Oregon related to two things. One is mobile crisis, and the other one is around behavioral health housing. We are anticipating getting additional funds that you all approved some funds for mobile crisis. I think it was last week that we're really excited about to expand our team of people who are able to go off-site 24/7 to provide mobile crisis supports. Oftentimes this is in conjunction with law enforcement, and we're really wanting to work to develop a model that really expands beyond that, where we can work with EMS and other partners to make sure that our team is accessible as possible. And then the behavioral health housing, we're anticipating getting an award that is upwards of $2.3 million coming to us related to behavioral health housing. It's a one-time investment of funds. And so of course, we're really looking at the types of things you use one-time funds for, capital and things of that nature. So we're really, really excited about this potential. We know that this continues to be an issue, and we know that Yamhill County has done some really creative things that haven't happened throughout the state with housing. And so we've got some really great models to be able to have a jumping off point for. So I'm very excited about that. And then of course, the Behavioral Health Regional Network funding, which is tied to Measure 110.
That's on my list to ask. So.
Yep. So that process has been delayed for a number of reasons. You're probably reading about that, hearing about that. Certainly we are really excited about those funds and hoping that we hear back about what is going to be funded in Yamhill County. We submitted a proposal that was a community-based proposal. So Yamhill County was the organization that submitted it and is the sort of lead agency. But we had an array of partners, community-based organizations and people who are part of that collaborative effort. And there's a huge amount of exciting things within that model we submitted. And so we're feeling very hopeful and excited about the potential for getting that. So fingers crossed that we hear more about that very soon. All I've got for you, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a couple. Did you want to follow up on Measure 110?
Oh, I have a couple too, so I'll just wait.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you may get them answered.
On the Tableau system, is that, does that connect to like a statewide
It is
system,
not.
or is it just, okay.
It's just internal. There are, I think OHA uses that as a platform, and there are some other counties that do, but it's not connected.
Okay. So I guess in just layman's terms, how would that have changed during your system during COVID? How would it have made it a lot easier, different sets of data?
Yeah, so I think the ability, once we populate the database, it's easy to extract the data versus having to manually do it each time. So I think it makes it so that the data is much more timely in terms of that and able to pull that out. It's also able to pull out graphs and charts and things like that so that it's displayed in a different way versus having staff have to sort of analyze the data and then find ways to graph it, chart it, make it all of those things. So I think it's really about having a more robust data set, and then also just the timeliness to be able to get those things completed.
Okay, and we have security along with that. That's
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. My other question was on the issue of the uptick in syphilis. Does that come with any sort of geographic elements? Is there something where it's prevalent in one area of the county?
That is such a great question. And at this moment in time, I don't have the answer to that, but that is part of what we're hoping to do a deep dive and understand. And I just wanted to call out some of the public health modernization funding that you've probably heard that came through the last legislative session and then came out to the local communities. Some of that funding we have used to increase our data analysis capabilities within public health, which has been so critical. And so with that funding support, we're combined with the SCD funding that was recently approved, we're going to be doing that deep dive, and I hope to have more information about that.
Okay.
That's probably a good one to not put on Tableau.
Yes,
And just
certainly.
like we do the things that we put available and not.
Yep, absolutely. There's always this piece of, we need to be very mindful about what would create a potential identification, and when we're talking about numbers, as alarming as 30 cases is right here in this moment, it's also a very low number when you're talking about the total population, and we have to be very mindful that we don't accidentally put anything out there that could identify an individual.
Yeah. Same with the suicide rate, is that you don't have any geographic data in terms of.
We actually do. We have one of the things that we're working on is an actual report that will have more details around that. So I hope to have that available in the coming months too, and I'd be happy to share that with the board.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if there's, socioeconomic issues as well that overlay that
Certainly.
particular area.
Yeah, I think that we're looking at geography, age, race, ethnicity, all of those types of things.
Okay. Commissioner Cooley, you said you have some follow-up questions.
Oh, yeah. Do you?
Go ahead.
Okay. You had mentioned, you said prevention, and then you said upstream prevention tools. And I was curious about I know that you know, but I don't know. What are the upstream prevention tools as opposed to the prevention tools?
That's great. So when I think of any sort of prevention, it's a spectrum, right? There's so much prevention that happens. And so on one end of the high, primary prevention or upstream prevention related to suicide, I think those types of things are things that create environments that are safe and supportive for, say, youth, right? And there's evidence-based programming, things like the program Sources of Strength, which is an evidence-based program that can be implemented in schools that create and emphasize help-seeking behaviors. So when someone is feeling like they have a concern, that it's sort of built into how we work together, that I ask for help. And sometimes we hear from a lot of people in the community, that's not what it feels like, that it doesn't feel like that. So like evidence-based programming is like that. And then of course, on the very other end of prevention, as it relates to suicide, I would say is our post-vention efforts, right? So when something does happen, sort of really wrapping supports around those individuals who were impacted to prevent any further loss.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good. And then on the measure what's the formal name of the fund?
The Behavioral Health Regional Networks.
The Behavioral Health Regional Networks.
Yeah, we're calling them the BURN grants. Yes.
Got it. I had heard, I heard when grant evaluators were evaluating, and then I think a week later, the announcement of OHA is delaying it. Do you have any sense of what happened in the middle there, or how grants like our requests been evaluated but not? I'm not sure if you have any more details on that.
I do not have any details other than the things that I've seen pushed out through sort of OHA's announcements and things.
Okay, it just seemed mysterious that it was like, well, I know that the grants are being evaluated right now. Okay, and then I think my third one would just be around the behavioral health housing. Is there, are you having discussions with builders who might have done things like the Sheridan project about?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think certainly looking at the models that we've done and replicating them is one possibility. And right now we're really trying to understand exactly where the best area to focus would be on. But that's definitely a possibility.
Okay, sounds good. And that's very exciting.
Yes.
And you said that was 2.3 million?
That is, it hasn't come out yet, but that is what they're estimating based on the funding formula that they're looking to approve.
Okay. Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you. I really appreciate your comment about the upstream and suicide prevention. And you know that I've been very proactive in the as a charter member of Oregon Firearm Safety Coalition. And what we're finding is that if we can reach the folks who are likely not to ask for help, can have a really significant impact: construction workers, first responders, veterans. And we're talking about the white rural male who is least likely to ask for help, especially if he's a firearms owner. So we've got a group together that includes OHSU, veterans groups. We've got public health directors from all over the state joining us now, and it's growing. And we're working on projects like safe storage for someone who feels they're in crisis. Hold My Gun, which is another initiative. So I would just encourage the county to get involved in those monthly meetings to see how there are actual initiatives that are going on, working with ranges and gun stores to say to folks who are least likely to ask for help, if you're in crisis, please reach out. And that is truly an upstream prevention.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we meet once a month, and it's been very effective. Youth outreach update.
Yeah. Yes. So this is exciting as well. So we're working on the lease process that is happening. I believe the lease has been reviewed internally and is now out with YCAP for the space. And I think once that happens, once that's finalized, they'll be able to move in. I know that I believe that they secured some funds for a remodel and things like that. But that's very exciting to have a drop-in center. I know that that's been a community need and want for a very long time.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. As far as beds for those who are seeking inpatient treatment, we know that they've been told sometimes you've got a 6-month wait, and when an addict is ready, we need to be able to provide that. Do we have any more information on how the county's responding so we can have folks closer to home?
Yeah, I think certainly this is the hard piece for us, and like a number of things, it can be hard for a county of our size to stand up a program with that level of intensity based on volume. And so we're really hoping that we can partner with some of our surrounding counties to, I think some of those are really great examples of a more regional approach, so that you've got the volume to warrant something as substantial as that. I think what we're really experiencing is certainly there's a lack of just kind of beds in general. But I think even more than that, one of the things that we experience on a significant level is there might be a bed available for, say, an acute bed for something related to mental health, but then that facility says, well, but we only manage folks with mental health, and if they have substance use disorder, we don't take that. Or the flip, someone who has a substance use disorder and there's an open bed for them in a facility that treats that, but the person's mental health complexity is one that they are saying they're not able to manage. And so we end up sometimes with open beds, but because of the complexity and the integrated components of mental health and substance use disorder, the facilities won't take them. So that is certainly a concern that is being raised through places like our Behavioral Health Association and things like that to the OHA level of, we need to have some statewide solutions around these things.
And thank you for that. And I appreciate what you had to say about making data available, especially folks who are looking for data on COVID. And we know that April 1st, the FDA released Pfizer's data, trial data, and came out with some interesting information about the fact that they don't know what it does to nursing mothers or pregnant women. So I'm wondering if we can incorporate just the primary data from Pfizer and the FDA in our data, because a lot of it goes contrary to what the state's narrative has been, what the prevailing narrative has been, and Pfizer is telling us early on that they knew a whole lot more than we have been sharing. And I'm just thinking of two things, not only for transparency and honesty, but also for the county's liability, that if we knew this stuff and we didn't share it, that we might be somehow in some way have some liability for not sharing this information. So it is out there now, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. I know it's 11,000 pages, but if you read the first summary, it really does distill it. And it is, we like to go to primary data instead of anything that's filtered through a narrative. So that would be my encouragement and my request.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And certainly I haven't read the 11,000 pages of that document. I will say, I think there are built-in components to our vaccination process that address some of that. So one of those being on what we call the vaccine administration record, which is something everyone completes before they fill it out. And the state has generally a template that they send out, and that's the one that we use. It includes questions like, are you pregnant? Are you breastfeeding? And those are, people answer yes or no. And when someone answers yes to those, that's sort of a marker for the person doing the vaccine to provide some additional level of information to them. So an example of that would be, I see that you are pregnant, or I see that you are breastfeeding. There haven't been clinical trials directly related to, a breastfeeding moms. Here's what we know or don't know. And, just so that they have that information for them. And that's generally what those questions, including those ones on that vaccine administration record, are used for, because really the only contraindication, meaning the only absolute reason someone is told not to get that vaccine, is if they have a known allergy to any of the components of it. But then there's these other pieces that we say, these are kind of prompts for more conversation with the individual, including that.
Thank you. As long as we're getting that information out there, appreciate that. And as far as the STD, the uptick, which is really significant, because Oregon, for some reason, it's just seeing this, it's just through the roof. As far as, are we able to use any, I think I might have asked you this in another way, are we able to use any of the COVID money that we could use, because it would be considered a communicable disease?
Yeah. So I don't think specifically that we could use it for active outreach for things related to non-COVID illnesses. I will say some of that funding has really supported some infrastructure builds around communications and around data analytics and things like that. And so it's helped build some of that out that can be used in some ways for that type of work, but largely we do need to rely on either that chunk of money that just came to us, or some of the just general state dollars that come to us for communicable disease, which is a very small amount that we've always gotten, but we are able to use that more broadly.
Okay, and thank you team. I know it's been a sort of busy for a lot of different reasons, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.
It was great to have you here. Thank you.
Yes, I was just looking at I was wondering if you sent the updated numbers for completed series and then booster shots, and it looks like it's only updated through March 31st, but we're at about 36%. Does that sound right?
In terms of boosters,
Booster?
that sounds right. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll make sure that we get that updated information to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Great. Thank you, Director Manfred.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you
Thank you
all.
very much.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to item F, which is our work session. We have a review and discussion of the Newburgh-Dundee bypass, and we're being joined by Dave Hageberg and Brett Baker. Welcome.
Dave's got that look on his face. He's got the look
got
on
the
his face.
smile.
Hang on to your wallets.
Well, before I respond to that, Commissioner, let me just say, Chair Burschauer, Commissioners, my name is Dave Hageberg. I'm fortunate to be Chair of your Yamhill County Parkway Committee, which is really the subject that I want to talk to you about today, and the opportunity for the county to invest in its project. So with that, I live at 1395 Northwest Willis Road in McMinnville, and we'll introduce Brett. He's going to be here with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm on the Parkway Committee. My name's Brett Baker. My address is 7275 Southwest Palmer Way, Beaverton, Oregon, 97007.
Thank you.
And I just want to say before Brett comes on, but we are fortunate to have Brett Baker on the Parkway Committee. While his address may be in Beaverton, he has been in a long-time relationship with the CEO of Austin Industries over ADEC, and has been an incredible part of our community through Springboard, and brings great value, as well as his value in the financial sector of the world and his help in the bypass. So with that, we really are here to bring you up to date a little bit, and then talk about a local funding opportunity for the continued enhancement and development of the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. As you know, phase one has been built. I think everywhere we go, we continually hear people who are so thankful for that first piece of the bypass. What's happening next is that when the bypass connects up at Highway 219, ODOT is now in the process of doing the engineering and design and acquiring right-of-way to build the first part of the interchange at 219. And that part has been funded. We work closely with our lobbyists and the Parkway Committee and all of our partners throughout the entire corridor from the metropolitan area of Portland to Lincoln City and Newport and the Tillamook and Yamhill County and Lincoln counties and legislators to put together a package. And the last legislature put up one before this last short section, $32 million to build that piece of the bypass. And one of the great things about it is going to realign Winooski Road so that it connects where the Wilsonville Road comes in. This hasn't been announced publicly, but it's going to come up at the Parkway Committee next Thursday. There has been a lot of concern from the Parkway Committee and the mayor of Newburgh and others that intersection, and now you add Winooski and you have trucks and it's night and it's raining and it's not a safe place. And I think ODOT has come to the point that is going to become a signalized intersection. It just can't continue the way it is without the safety hazards that are involved. So just an update on that. And that's part of some of the things that your Parkway Committee is involved with. The second thing, construction is scheduled to start on that first piece of the interchange in 2023. So that's good news. That will happen, completion in 2024. The next thing is that, of course, the construction of the piece of the bypass from 219 back up around behind Providence Hospital past the golf course and connecting at 99W at Rex Hill. The first part of the design, the 50% design that has been done by David Evans and Associates has been completed. It was given and delivered to ODOT just recently. They are reviewing it internally. We're looking forward to seeing what the price number is on that and how much the reserve for inflation, if you will be. But well, let us just say that the last number that somebody at ODOT just threw off the cuff of what it would cost for phase 2 to build that part is in the neighborhood of $200 million. Now, we're hoping that it will be less than that when we see that from David Evans and Associates. We know that prices are going crazy on all kinds of materials, but it's a number. So as a result of that, then we also have phase 3 from Dundee to Dayton, which clearly is going to have to happen every time you go through that. You know what we're going to do is we're going to have an incredible bypass, and right in the middle, we've really moved the traffic jam at the light in Dundee to Sokolblosser Lane, if you will. And so we got to finish that piece too. That's 100.
I think my husband would
And
agree.
Susan Sokolblosser isn't paying me to name it that, but you got to put a point in the map. And so the last projection I saw, and they've done a conceptual design for phase 3, and that number is at about $159 million. So somewhat less and a lot less complicated than the other sections. So as a result of those numbers on phase 2, Travis Brower, who is just under the director at ODOT, and Travis is in charge of funding on all of these big projects, contacted us and said, you know, there's some opportunities we hope for a large federal grant coming up. And in order to get those grants, we're going to need to have a match, usually 20%, sometimes 15%. And ODOT indicated, and Mr. Brower indicated, that they thought they could come up with $20 million if the locals could come up with a similar amount to use those dollars to go look for big dollars to build that piece from 219 up to Rex Hill. So we had that conversation. No guarantees if you get it or that you'll get the grant, but if you don't go try, you never succeed. And so we've been entering into conversations with ODOT about that. The question then is, well, where do we go to get a local match? Go back a few years, and the way we got to where we are today was the match that we created, a $20 million match that we all know from Newburgh, Dundee, McMinnville, Yamhill County, and then of course the incredible generosity of the tribe. They were really the first one that stepped up on that 20 million. And you know, it's like everything else, momentum counts when you're out asking people for their money, Commissioner. And that was a key. So this time where we are is how do we put that package together? There's some ground rules I think we have had at the Parkway Committee and talking to our various constituents in the project. And it's this: nobody is financially in a position to come up with a bigger amount of payment. So if you said, okay, you're now paying so much for phase 1, let's give us some more money and we'll take it out of your revenue stream and pay for funding for phases 2 and 3. What we've heard loud and clear is that the payments that are currently being made by the entities for phase 1 can't go up. And so we sat down, we looked at it, what would be a strategy? Brett and I talked and the others and said, what if we just extended the debt? This isn't anything new. If you just said, let's extend the term of the debt. And if you do that, you can borrow more money against that debt. And how much would that raise? The second thing to me that was important was not to try and invent a whole new financial package. If you recall, when we put the first phase together and it was a complex program, we said, let's just take the same program and just extend the debt, leave the payments the same, and see how much we could contribute as a part of this process. And so we did that. And Brett's going to talk about the amounts, but we did that. And then we started meeting, and Brett and I have met, we've had a lot of meetings. And I will tell you that we made a commitment between the two of us. With all the meetings we have to get this funding package put together by the 12th of May, we made a commitment, no matter what else we have, we'll cancel it to have meetings like this or any other ones to move forward. And we'll talk about what the success and where we are on that as part of this report. So we then said, okay, we've got to get a unanimous participation by the 3 cities, the county, and then what can we handle with respect to conversations with the tribe? And we've done that. So we have met with the city of Dundee and we didn't ask them to vote on the package. We just said, look, what we want to know is, here's the amount of money we could raise. Here's Dundee's share. Here's the length of the term of that debt. And in order to move forward, if you concur that you want to move forward and consider it further, we'll need to get a package of loan documents from the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Bank restructuring the debt. And do you want us to go forward? And they said unanimously, yes. We want to continue to look at ways to fund this next piece of the bypass or the next 2. And remember, when I say piece, Dundee and all of our other partners have said, look, you came to me once and we participated in phase 1. You're back now with respect to phase 2. We want it to be phase 2 and 3. We want it phased to finish. We don't want, Commissioner, we don't want to see Dave Hageberg again for phase 3. So one more. And so what we've done is to structure this in a way that whatever we come up with, a portion will go to phase 2 and a portion will go to phase 3 for a match there. And it will, and I can tell you, it'll have to be in the loan document so that there's an allocation there and then see where we can come up with dollars. So that was another key point of the loan. So Dundee said, come back. We have now met with the city of McMinnville. Same result. They said, bring us back the package. We want to look at it and consider it for formal action. Clearly, if they weren't interested, they could have just said, don't bother. So McMinnville said, bring us back a package. Brett and I have a meeting next Monday night with Newburgh, and we'll have that same conversation. I can tell you the mayor of Newburgh clearly understands the incredible benefit of this completion of the bypass to Newburgh and the Dundee area. And it's my judgment they're going to say, bring us a package. While there's no commitments, Brett and I met yesterday with several people from the tribe, one of whom is Rob Green, their council. I'll tell you, Rob Green was the brains behind their original contribution. You never hear about the people that come up with the ideas that make it possible. It's one thing for the tribal councils to say we'd like to do it. It's another one to where's the stream of revenue. And so give Rob Green all the congratulations. So Brett and I met with Rob and Denise Harvey yesterday and had a conversation. There's clearly no commitment on behalf of them, but Rob Green said, here is a mechanism. If the council wants to make a significant investment, here's the way it can happen. And it makes abundant sense. So I think both Brett and I felt very good about that conversation. I've met with the tribal council chair Kennedy, has said, you know we know we need to be a continued partnership in this, and we'll come back and we'll have a further conversation about what we as a tribe can do. So all of those things line up to get us to where we want to go. If you look at the chart, and Brett will talk about it, you know, Travis Brower at ODOT would like to think that we'll put up 20 million for phase 2 and another 20 for phase 3. I just have to be really practical here today. That's not going to happen. And Mr. Brower knows that we're going to be having a serious conversation about what is an appropriate match. But Brett and I have talked about it. I've done a lot of calculations and figuring it out. I think between this program and what we can get from the tribe, I think we can get to a point where we can make something happen for phases 2 and 3. The bigger challenge is just getting the federal funding. You know, trying to get a $160 million federal grant is going to be enormous. But, you know, we haven't just sat back on that one. Right now, you've heard about the appropriations requests that can go into the senators and to the House for appropriation earmarks, call them as you wish. And so Michelle Jaguar, our lobbyist, and I met and spent a lot of time working on what would be an appropriate request. We could have asked for some money for phase 2, but you know what? The key to building phase 3 is to getting it started. Now, ODOT's not as excited about getting it started because they're, you know, once you do, you kind of make a commitment to build phase 3. They want to finish phase 2. I want a commitment for phase 3. So we came up with a proposal to request $10 million for work to go on phase 3, which would be to do the design work and to deal with McDougal Corner. I mean, think about it. It's probably the only place in Oregon where there are 2 major highways with that huge volume of traffic that come together in an uncontrolled intersection. It's in the top 5% of accidents in the state. It just needs to be done. And why would you wait years to start building phase 3 before we deal with the public's right to a better, safe intersection? So we came up with that, and ODOT said, it's too much money. We don't think you can get that request to the senators. As it turned out, there now is a limit to how much you could ask. And so I was told, you know, if we did that, they wouldn't be a partner in the request and wouldn't be there. And so Michelle Jaguar said, David, you're in a very complicated and difficult position. So what do you want to do? Well, it isn't like you can call a committee meeting in the next 15 minutes because you know, we're right at the deadline. I said, pretty easy to me, ask for $10 million. You never get there if you don't. You can always go down, but you can't go up. So we did that. We've got that request in, but it had an impact because then Mr. Walker, who's the engineer and in charge of the project, put together a request that just went into Bonamici's office a couple of days ago. And guess what? He asked for $7 million on behalf of ODOT and went through ODOT staff, and ODOT agreed to put up a match of about $700,000. But Andrew did it in a way that was very well worded. He didn't say just what all we would do, but it left it open. If we can get some additional dollars, we could do safety enhancements there at McDougal and put in the right safety device. You know, there's a conversation, should it be a light? Should it be a roundabout? But whatever it is, it needs to go through the process, but you can't do it if you don't have money. So that's just what we've done on that one. And then finally, I just want to point out, and I think you have the chart with the different funding, and there's a top level of what all the communities would do, and it shows under the second column that it would raise 17.8 million. The bottom one is another one that's 18,156,000. And what's that all about? For a long time, I've had comments that have come from a number of directions, and particularly in some of the Gundy area and others, that we have a number of other small communities in the county. There's 7 small communities. They might say big, but anyway, that haven't put in any funding into this. I've had that conversation. I've talked to some, and I've talked to the lawyers with some and others. And candidly, for all kinds of reasons, it just doesn't have any traction. And when you need $200 million, chasing $1,000 doesn't seem too productive for your time. Having said that, I also saw that as an opportunity. There's the political side, which is we need to do something to have a reflection of a contribution on their behalf. And so I said, if the county did something on the behalf of those communities, you could accomplish that. Now, I'm a little more practical than that. I put down 350,000 as the ask, which is 50,000 for each of those 7 cities. And when I say I'm more practical, when you think about it, that would add about another between $1.5 and $2 million more of money with those local dollars that we could get for federal matches. And so it's a big deal in terms of raising federal and grant opportunities. It's the other side of it is Commissioner Sterrett and I had a conversation some time ago, and she said, well, But I don't want to see, I don't want to see this impact other operations of the county if you're even going to consider it. And if you'll notice, it doesn't change, it extends to slightly the debt term for the county, but it doesn't ask for a single dollar more out of your annual revenue. And if you think about it, when you get out at the far end and you're talking $350,000 and with inflation the way it is, it's not going to be very much money. So that might be one of the best things you could do, particularly when Brett talks about the loan terms. I just want to make it, I think it's important. I'd tell you the other reason I think it's really important is because when we go negotiate with ODOT and with the delegation about how much is an appropriate match, I want to be able to say, we not only looked under every rock, but we looked under coins and every cushion to get every dollar. And we've absolutely maxed out the capacity of our local partners to put this together. So that's why it's in there. I'm not asking for a decision today, but you needed to have a more robust conversation about what are you doing, Dave? I mean, is there no limit to your handout? So with that, Brett?
Is there no limit?
Dave, do we have a copy of that, or is that something you're?
Did you not get these?
I don't think so.
Well, I've got it. I thought they were in the-
I have the map, but not that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I was actually wondering about that earlier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll let you look at it for a second.
I haven't memorized.
You have it memorized?
I haven't memorized. Can you hear me? Yeah. I have seen it a few times. I guess one of the advantages too, Dave, as I see it, maybe you've already said this, but of having the other 7 cities is that we can say all of the cities have our support this, right?
Absolutely. You go to-
Which seems important.
One has to be careful of saying, there's been a confirmation made either by or on behalf of.
It's a little tailwind as you're visiting, the
Mhm.
congressional delegation,
Mhm.
It's kind of like if you're on a nonprofit board and you're going to a donor, they want to know, is everyone on the board donating to this charity?
Okay, well,
Okay.
I think I get it.
Sure.
I
Well,
think
it's,
that you're gonna-
it's really pretty straightforward. And Dave did a pretty good job of most of the framework of this. So we met with the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Bank. First time I'd ever met with them. And yeah, I was shocked, me personally, at the terms they were offering. Because essentially it's the Oregon Department of Transportation. They have their own kind of line of credit they'll do for municipalities. And so basically we went to them and suggested they do some modeling to keep the payment the same and extend the term out. And what that does is it creates more cash now that the municipalities can inject into the project. It's just like, on a residential mortgage, you pay it off over a period of time, it goes down, but it's the same term and you redo it and you can generate more money to redo a kitchen or something. It's the same principle basically. And so the surprising thing to my mind were the terms. So they will allow, if it goes forward, they'll allow the municipalities, the local municipalities, like the county and the cities, they'll allow them to lock a rate in May of 2022, so next month, that is locked for the entire term of this obligation, including future tranches. So coming from the banking business, those terms don't make a lot of sense. There's no bank that would offer those terms. And I don't know, but it may be a way that ODOT's trying to help. I don't know. But anyway, let me see what else. And then you can see the numbers there. You probably, it keeps your payment the same. For the county, it's $665,000 a year now. it frees up 11, yeah, about 11 million more dollars, a little more than $11 million. And the rate, rates are pretty volatile right now, but it will likely be in the range of 2.5% to 3%, which you guys are, historically, those are incredibly low rates, for a long time view of things. What else? I think that's it. Of course, any questions, let us know. So, and also, as I mentioned, they will lock in the rate on future tranches. It's anticipated that it'll take, 10 plus years to finish the bypass. So then the notion is the rate lock, the real amortization portion starts after the bypass is done. And then it's for 30 years. So if you add them together, most of the municipalities, if you took it to term, it'd be like 40 years is how long the loan would be for.
Right, because if it's 10 years from now to the very end.
Right.
Yeah. The very end of transplanting the last plants.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, this frees up, I mean, it's kind of like a domino deal. I mean, the first thing that they want to see is that the local municipalities, yep, we want this project. And then for the first time, Dave's been on them for decades. ODOT's going to inject some money is what they're signaling. And then that cues up the project to go get a big federal grant.
Well, I think it's important to recognize when you build phase 2, that's when they would start drawing against a portion of the locals' monies for the match on phase 2. And then when you build phase 3, you would again have a draw period where you would draw against that. And that needs to be clear in the document that you've got money that can't be drawn until they build phase 3. That's what makes sure that money goes there. Whole construct. Now, suppose that for whatever reason, we can't go get a grant this cycle, or we don't get one and we've applied. Why the need to do this? First, you just can't go ask for these big grants unless you can check the box that the money is readily available. And more importantly, as Brent mentioned with rates, the reason that we're working really hard to put this together, and we've got, as I said, Newburgh, we're waiting to get the actual loan document from the infrastructure bank. I understand it's been drafted. It's at the Department of Justice for their review, and then we'll get it and circulate it. So you'll have it. But the push to do this is the Oregon Transportation Commission's next meeting is on May 12th. And that's the time they have to approve the loan. It has to go before them. Their next meeting isn't until July. And you can just watch the news media about what the Fed is talking about and significantly increasing interest rates. So there is a real compelling reason to get this done and lock that rate on the 18th of May, even though you may not need it the year after, the year after. If you never draw against it, it doesn't matter. It's like a line of credit. So it is a big tool to have it in place for the future and going forward. So that's why there's this push by Brett and myself to put this package together. It doesn't mean anything to us, but it's a huge advantage as opposed to waiting a few months and having rates go to 3.5 or 4. And then the bottom line of how much you borrow is going to go down significantly as a match. So questions?
Oh, the one thing I don't think I verbally pointed out, although you all probably figured it out by looking at it, is so this, what we would call in the bank business, blend and extend. So you blend the current debt with future debt, keep the payment the same, generates more cash currently. Well, according to ODOT used 2.75% interest to model this. So if you do the blend and extend, it generates in current dollars to inject in the project 17.8 million, and then you add in the savings. Did we mention the savings from you mentioned that, didn't you? The savings from the first phase and proportionally each municipality, if you add up that savings, it's about $3 million. And ODOT's indicated that they will allow the municipalities a credit for that. So that brings you up to, $21 million. And that then is what ODOT's looking for to do some kind of a match is the word they've used. 15 to 20 million, I think is what Travis said afterwards. And then that we're hopeful is enough money to queue us up well to go after a federal grant. And ODOT has a grant in mind, I believe, right now.
So that's where when we go, if you take that and get to 21 million, that 3 million is the money that was. When ODOT built phase one, they came in under budget about $30 million. And about 10% of that is really our contribution to that big project out of ours. So we, if we get back a piece of that, then I'm saying it's somewhere around 3 million. We would get credit for that. And then, of course, the tribe's contribution will be a critical component. And that's why we really went to the tribe next. They have a little more flexibility in putting together what it takes to put local funding packages together for both parts. Right?
Chair. So just for a frame of reference, so for phase one, there was a local total buy-in of, was it roughly 20 million?
20 million.
Okay. And now you're asking for a similar number of additional local buy-in.
Commissioner, I think probably to put together a local match for both phases 2 and 3, we're in the 32, 3 million range somewhere that is possible. And so that's what we're looking for. So there'd be about a 17 or 18 $million match for phase 2, and phase 3 is not as expensive. So maybe it's 13, 14 million.
Okay, because I was thinking, 360 million roughly for phase 2B and 3. 20% is a lot higher. So we're just constricted based on the reality of what we're seeing.
I mean, if you did the math, you might come up with, ODOT would say, well, you should put in more. Well, you know what? You can only do what you can do.
Okay.
I think that my understanding is 10% if from cities, county, tribal partners for the combined, and then ODOT match to take us up to 20% overall for the two phases.
Okay.
That's, I think, I believe that's what.
Okay. And Ken, just for reference, this comes out of our gas tax.
Correct.
money.
Correct. That's funded. The payments are currently being made out of Fund 11, which is our road department, our road fund.
Okay. Any concern over long-term commitment of 40+ years? Other than the governor wants to get rid of our gas cars.
I'm not sure if I'm ready to,
Okay.
yes, there's always going to be concerns about sustainability of revenues, and especially like you were saying with transition. I mean, our revenues are based on gas tax. So depending on the long-term sustainability of the gas tax, there's always questions with that, but.
Okay.
Well, I can tell you, Commissioner, that we've asked, one of the things we point out to OTIP that is a part of the loan agreement, there needs to be a provision in there because Ken's right on, is we transition from gas tax to some other funding mechanism. It needs to anticipate that that's going to happen, and it doesn't, and do it in a way that doesn't adversely affect your payments in the stream.
And one of the things we talked about, Dave, was the concern about McMinnville's plan to potentially develop around the airport, and the conflict that creates, right, with local partners investing and then potentially having some issues down the road. So I think that if this is something that this body proceeds with, we're going to have to be involved in those conversations, and they're happening pretty soon.
So the Commissioner, I think that raises an important question. I'm glad you did, because I intended to bring that up next, and that is we have built phase one. And the part we've invested in phase two is another $300 million of the public's money. And of that, 20 million was all yours, and we're asking for more. And we've done that on the basis that we're creating a regional bypass from the metropolitan area to the Central Oregon coast. And we've got partners all along that area, and the tribes of the Grand Ronde, but on down to the coast and the cities and the legislators down there that have made it possible for us to get the money to make phase two go forward. And it's all done because this was going to be a regional bypass. You have, and we're solving the problem of Newburgh and Dundee. And now if I'm to go talk to our funding sources, and they are going to say, well, you know, we just spent $300 million to fix the problem in Newburgh and Dundee, and you want more to do that. And now you just moved the traffic jam, not to Soka-Blosser Lane, but you have made a city street, a commercial street out of 3 Mile Lane. It's about the same length as driving through Dundee. You put 60 acres of commercial property, you put Costco, you put a new super Walmart store, and you use up a huge amount of the capacity that the people bought. And I will just tell you that without expression, I mean, everybody has to make a policy. McMinnville's going to have to make one. But if you do that, it will become inordinately more complicated and difficult to finish the first phases 2 and 3.
Right.
Maybe phase 2 because there's a huge investment in it. I think phase 3 is incredibly difficult. So from a standpoint, I think the partners ought to know and ought to weigh in on this very question. And, you know, it's on the agenda for the Parkway Committee coming up. Brett Baker said, Dave, we have got to have a conversation about this.
Mhm.
And I can tell you our lobbyist is shaking her head that how do you go raise another $350 million? At the same time, the people are going to provide that. And we're going to be back to the Oregon legislature. And they're going to say, well, why do we invest in that when you're just going to screw it up again? And so this is a serious public policy question between partners of, you know, this isn't McMinnville just doing what it wants, and nobody wants to tell one municipal entity how it should do and what it should do as it's growing and developing. But when it impacts partners that have worked together for a third of a century, then I think the county should weigh in. You've got, you know, you're not just going to McMinnville, Yamhill County is Will Minot shared in that whole end of the county, and you're going to come up and you ask that question. It's a difficult one. And I'm asking you to come up with $11.5 million. And you're going to say, well, how does that help the rest of the county if you're going to just move the traffic jam? And you know, that highway has a certain amount of capacity. And even if you look at it, some of the intersections in 15 years that they're going to create are going to start, it's going to look like Aurora Donald. You know, and it's going to cost $75 million to fix Aurora Donald because the Marion County Commissioners created a big commercial corner right there. And who profited? A bunch of people that are in the business world. I'm fine. I'm all for that, but not at the expense of our partnership in the public highway. So do I sound like I am concerned? Not because Dave Ogburn is going to matter one way or the other, but I am concerned about the impact it's going to have on the ability to fund the rest of the bypass.
Well, it's not just you. We've been hearing this concern for months, especially from some former commissioners who were a part of that discussion initially. So commissioners' thoughts, questions for Dave or Brett?
I think, yeah, I wanted to see if you could address there is a coming increase in the gas tax as part of HB 2017, right? And do you want to address the conversations you've had, both Parkway and also with the state?
Well, you got 2 cents just recently, and you'll get 2 cents more in 24, I believe it is. And those are part of that gas tax bill that funded some of these developments. And ODOT asked if I thought that the county, for example, would use some of that 2 cent increase, the one you just got or the one you're going to get, and borrow even more money. And I can say my quick answer was, look, First of all, that's not a question for Dave Hogberg, but I can tell you what I think is gonna happen. So, you know, every time we come to you, ODOT, and keep in mind, ODOT has yet to put a first dollar of their money into this project. This 20 they're now offering is the first. And I said, every time we come to you, you say, well, we're financially constrained. And I said, well, but you just got this increase or that. Well, yeah, but it's all gone because we're planning and we're out there in our step. I said, well, what do you think the county does? I mean, the county doesn't just sit there and say, we're going to get 2 cents in 2 years and, oh golly, we'll figure out what to do with it then. The county, just like everybody else, has got long range highway needs, you got bridge needs, you know what those are, you plug in, you've got a much longer budget cycle. You're saying, here's what we need to fix out in the future. I said, I'm just telling you, I think the 2 cents has long since been allocated to critical important county projects. Now, if you want to spend part of that, go ahead, but that's what I told ODOT and they had it coming.
And I'll say that full disclosure, I said, well, I also can't speak for anybody except for myself, but no.
So I didn't even ask you, I didn't know.
Speaking for myself, no.
I have a question about you. Thank you, Chair. A question about just anecdotally, do we have any information about if this has been done anywhere else, what the template has, how is that proved out?
The match?
No, in other words, the whole concept that you're bringing before us today, I'm sure it's been done somewhere else. I'm wondering if you have any information on how that has worked out.
I don't know that it's been done on a major highway project because we were really the first. They weren't even thinking about it. Was OTIP relevant when we did the first one? And it really moved them into that. What I think Brett could comment, not so much on highways, but they are involved in a lot of different funding packages that.
So Mary, so you're asking about the actual loan structure? Is that what you're asking
Yes.
about? Okay.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm sure that I don't know for sure, but I'm sure they've done them on highways, but they've done a number of projects around Oregon. I can't remember the volume, probably like 10 or 20 a year. My observation was this is something within the Oregon Department of Transportation. They're almost trying to make a business unit, and it was almost like they were, and not criticism, but it's almost like they're trying to sell this to, this project. And that doesn't mean that what they're selling is not good. It is good. It's a wonderful structure. So they do these all over the state. They do them for private entities too, which I was surprised. The example they gave us was Mount Hood Meadows. The organization borrowed money from OTIP to redo the parking lot there. So they're trying to loan this out. I did ask him, I said, well, how many municipalities know about this in Oregon? And he said, well, not as many as we'd like. We're trying to get the word out. But he goes, interestingly enough, every time someone does engage in this program, they always come back. I want to do more. And I can understand why. I mean, they're offering just incredible terms without you all, the smaller municipalities having to go to bond market themselves and just go to the state of Oregon and, borrow the money from the state. That's a
No,
long one.
No, that
Winded
answer,
I don't know. if that's
that
what
was a
you're
good
looking
answer,
for.
yes, because I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, do we have any
Yeah.
precedent for this?
Yes, they've done this before. And I'm sure they've done it on a highway, but they do these projects all over Oregon.
Okay, thank you.
And I think they're offering us this incredible opportunity on fixing that interest because ODOT has been, I can't tell you how many times I have publicly, even in the Transportation Commission and the legislature, criticized ODOT for not putting in their own money. This is a way where they can make a significant difference for us in terms of funding with that kind of an interest rate arrangement. So I think it's kind of here's something that could make a huge difference in terms of your ability to put this together.
Thank you.
So next, sorry.
No, I just wanted to make sure, Chair. I've listened to a lot of these conversations, provided feedback. And that means that I've also had more time to think about it too. So just full disclosure with that. This seems to be the best way for us to put money out while still making sure that our own road budget, which I'm near and dear to my heart, is still stable and getting us moving forward. That ODOT needs to see the local match so that the Fed see the local match so that we actually get it built.
That's a great argument. I'm going to bring that back up and your words are going to come back to you, Commissioner, in just a few moments on another agenda item. But so thank you.
I'm prepared for it.
I'm gonna put my hands in my pocket.
Yeah, good idea.
Anything else? Or if you have additional questions, feel free to have somebody or Ken reach out to us to respond to other items.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's very helpful.
So next steps would be to finalize the funding package or what it will look
We
like.
would get you that and then we'll schedule, we'd come back at the end of the month, at the first of the month, and another one to have you, so you got something in front of you, so that what we've said is in writing, and then you can decide the action you want to take on the package and the small cities and the whole thing, and what I also will pledge to you is that, we've got a meeting, Monday with City Council of Newburgh, and we'll let Ken or somebody know how that goes, because I think, this is all the pieces have got to come together, and that's the magic of what is happening, and that's the partnership that we don't want to lose.
Great. Thank
All
you,
right.
Brett.
Thank
you,
you.
Dave.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, commissioners, that brings us to our consent agenda. There is nothing on the consent agenda today. And we are now on item 8, old business. Does anyone need to take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
Okay, sure. We will take a 5-minute break and resume at 11:20.
That's 6 minutes.
You said aloud, but I thought in my head.
There's gonna be a lot of roundings.
Yes.
Let's wait till we're recording so we can get that on the record. I think
Right now, leaving executive session.
Okay, so it looks like 11:20, we are back in business. And item H is old business. H1 is consideration of approval of recommendations to be made by the selection committee for the Yamhill County Investing in Nonprofit Organizations Grant Program. This is continued from last week, April 7th, 2022. And I'm gonna call for public testimony. Jason, you have the honor and privilege of being the first in-person testimony of since we got back into in-person meetings. So,
I'm so glad.
Jason, and just for the record, please state your name and address.
Sure. It's Jason Willoughby, and it's 640 Northwest Brookview Court, McMinnville, Oregon, 97128. Yeah, I'm here to, okay, truth in advertising. I'm here doing a favor for my wife, who has been in leadership in the Gallery Theater, and was the most fortunate soul to be the president when COVID shut everything down. So personal witness to all the time, energy, aggravation, being a leader during COVID, you don't need me to tell you, it's been tough. And nonprofits, because it's all volunteer, even harder, because nobody's paid to do what they do. So I wanted to basically appeal as, first of all, as someone who is on the conservative side of things. And so I wanted to state very openly, I believe in trimming waste, in being careful with public monies. I believe in being skeptical. There's a lot of gray ideas to spend other people's money. And so I am a philosophic on that side of the aisle. So wanted to have some truth in advertising here. That being said, I also believe that there's some other elements of conservatism and good governance. And the folks who applied for the grants, and my wife really got the Gallery Theater working on their grant writing for the very first time. She's been instrumental. So I get to hear a lot about that too. I do not fault you for examining things closely, having qualms and second thoughts, and no problem, totally agree. I think had this been a discussion for next year's grants, where the yardsticks would have been clear, the goalposts would have been clear, and where we might have avoided being Lucy and Charlie Brown trying to kick the football and having it pulled at the last minute. And I know you haven't made a final decision, and I guess I'm really here to say, humbly say, please reconsider. I think a lot of the hard work the grant writing people have put in with clearly established categories, meeting the criteria, being given good feedback, that's valid work. And that was good faith work. And so I wanted to just make that point. A specific question apparently was raised about Gallery Theater in particular. And again, because of my spousal connection, I happen to be aware of, the special challenges. Theater tends to, especially volunteer theater, is pretty low on the food chain when it comes to the theater world, and it's all volunteer. And one of the things that volunteer organizations have a hard time doing is strategic planning. It's very easy to be so into the same circle, small group of people, that it's hard to think outside that box. It's hard to then with COVID, to have the energy to do that kind of intense, creative, long processing work. So there is a definite need. It would be a big, big help for them to up the quality of what they do. And I think one of the things I've noticed is that as we become a different county, as we're changing, the expectations of how high a quality our restaurants, our theater experiences, people's expectations seem to be going up. And so again, there's pressure on a lot of volunteer groups to up their game at a time when everyone's tired from COVID and all that stuff, and where it's difficult to have the creative juice to do something like strategic planning. So I just wanted to humbly appeal on behalf of Gallery Theater and my spouse for you all to reconsider some of the concerns and honor the good faith work these guys have put in. And I think having a more excellent theater will be a blessing in the tourism and leisure industries. I think it's like, they're all part of a tapestry, and when one part sucks, it just isn't. I mean, they don't suck, but you know what I'm saying? It's like improving the quality. The rising tide lifts all the boats, so to speak. So I just want to thank you. That's pretty much all I came here to say. I'm not an axe grinder. It takes a pretty big thing for to come out and talk on an issue. So I'm not one of the chronic complainers. I'm part of the building crew, and very much respect the work you all are doing. I know it's tough. I know everyone thinks their thing is the most important thing, and we know it's not. But it's important nonetheless, and I think it would be what's the word I'm looking for? It would be an excellent return on the county's investment in a public-private partnership to help the theater up its game, and it needs to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your work in the community in general,
Yeah.
and the work that you've done with outreach to kids. And it's been some really challenging stuff. So I just want to say, I know that there are not a lot of people that go out on the streets and help kids who are struggling, but my appreciation for what you do.
Well, we can admire one another then. All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you, Jason.
And I do want to acknowledge that we also received considerable written testimony as well
That's right.
regarding this agenda item. So we have reviewed those.
Yes.
Okay, commissioners, I also noticed that.
We've received them, I guess,
we-
is another way to put it. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chair. There was just the
We
quizzical
didn't
looks.
forward them,
Yes.
is what you're saying. We
Oh.
didn't forward them.
We can,
Okay, we can do that.
now we all. are
Carrie,
gonna forward.
however, did
No, we're all
forward
gonna
to
forward.
us,
I'll just,
and I didn't
again,
check to see
take
who
an
was
advantage
CC'd.
I
that just
did.
because a letter or correspondence has been sent to a commissioner, that doesn't necessarily make it part of the public record for the formal session unless a commissioner would like staff to add it as part of the record.
Okay, thank you for that.
We will forward, or I will.
I nominate.
I will
Commissioner Gula.
forward.
Yeah, because otherwise we're all.
I'm the
gonna-
vice chair. I should be the one to forward all of our emails on this
Forward all the
particular
stuff.
subject. How
Thank
about
you.
that?
You spoke up.
I
so you get it.
know. And thank you,
Okay.
Carrie, for sending them to us.
Did send it as well.
Yes, absolutely. And those weren't CC'd to BOC.
They were not.
Were they?
No.
I don't think so. Okay. Okay, so also include Carrie's.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
and we do that just to clarify because we don't necessarily want staff being in a position
Of
of
deciding that.
making a decision on
Yeah.
what becomes part of the meeting record and what doesn't. So
Yeah.
that's why if there's questions about that.
And Chair, if I may, there was a lot of very eloquent and passionate testimony to us about the value of some of the programs that were up for consideration, and also kind of about the process as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I will also note that under other business item 3, there is consideration of approval of 500,000 to Yamhill County from Yamhill County American Rescue Plan Act Fund Grant Award dollars for the Stratus Capital Project, which I'm going to assume is also part of this discussion. Stratus would be the Housing Authority. Is that correct, Commissioner Starrett? It's meant to be a part of.
Yes,
The
I was just
discussion.
wondering, since there was some immediacy to it, if I was requesting that the board act on this, even if we don't come to any other conclusions today on allocations.
Okay.
And I want to say things too, but I'm hesitant since we're on this particular agenda item, but I have some thoughts as well about it.
Well, I would prefer that we include that discussion in this discussion, because if we do decide to do that, then the
Mhm.
entire process changes.
I don't think it has to, and that's why I wanted to add my thoughts. as well.
Okay. Okay, well, just to recap, last week we had a very lengthy discussion about the recommendations that came forward from the selection committee and how they were scored. There were 3 different options in terms of funding, and concerns were raised about who was on that list. I did propose an award list that was focused more on what I would deem critical needs, and I shared that with all of you. I've put a lot of thought into that discussion. I've also done some research on some of those groups in terms of funding that they have received to date and from ARPA, either from the state or from the cities. You know, my thought process remains the same, that I think that we do need to apply a critical needs lens to this. The economic indicators, as I discussed last week, you know, are sort of top of mind. And I believe that these funds should go to the nonprofits in our county that are doing the boots on the ground work for not only housing, but food assistance. I suppose we should, you know, if we're going to talk about housing authority, I feel like we need to get that discussion out of the way, because that really does inform the rest of the process. So Commissioner Sterrett, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about why you proposed the $500,000 to housing authority.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the reason why I brought this forward is because there is there's some urgency to this. There is a deadline for the Housing Authority to apply for the $11 million LIFT grant. And I'm looking at some of the other buy-in. We were talking about that earlier, about who has thrown in to support this. And I think it's significant to notice that we have, for instance, the tribes committing $7 million, City of McMinnville, $250,000, and additional fundraising, they're looking for $600,000. The Willamette Valley Wineries Association, $250,000, and then a variety of others. So in looking at the necessity to convince the state that we've got local buy-in, if the county is not, I think, significantly at the table, it will show that there's not that support. And we know that these grants are extremely competitive, and the application will be stronger. We talk week after week in some capacity or another about the importance of affordable housing. Here we have a project that is basically shovel ready. It's going to be a collaboration with the county in other areas of supported housing, and we have a growing need for affordable housing. So I'm just saying, in light of the fact that they have a deadline of 4/22 for this application, I would like to see us make this a priority, even if we haven't addressed the other applications on the list.
Can I add
Okay.
to that, or did you want to add any clarifying questions?
I would love clarification maybe from Carrie. So is the Stratus Village the same component that they submitted an application for?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Cool.
Okay. I think that this is both timely and possible. I would like to see, so if you recall the EDAC, when we charged them with, like, let's hear some ideas. What is it that you feel like businesses need at a bigger scale, not just individual businesses, for really recovery long term? And one of the things they said is that in the next round, you know, that's what for the public record, right? And then the next round, we want to focus on housing, and I don't remember the other thing. Do you remember the other thing? They said, here's our recommendation for the first round of funding. Here's our recommendation for the next round of funding, and we'll tease it out. And it was really housing was the thing that they wanted to focus on in the next round of funding. What I would propose, because it is a timely thing, and Jason Willoughby just left, but I think he spoke eloquently to the process, and other people have spoken eloquently to that. So my proposal, excuse me, would be that we approve the grant request as option 3, which would put $250,000 into the Housing Authority's project, and then by our decision, because we haven't set up the process yet for the housing money that EDAC recommended we use and grant out, that we take $250,000 of it and also place it in as an additional award to the Housing Authority for the Stratus project, so that we know that we have this money that we are going to be responsible for spending on housing anyway, And this is something that we can obviously do.
I like that suggestion, but I had a question about the application because we know there was some confusion when they applied and how it was a mistake, it was an oversight that it was actually listed. It was not listed as capital. And so that would have changed the ask from 250 to 500. No.
It would have changed the ask to 500, but that wouldn't matter based on their ranking, and it would still, their best option still would have been option 3
Okay.
for funding.
Okay, that's good clarification.
And so I guess that's just if we hold to both what they applied for, the funding we have available, how they scored, then option 3 gets them the most from this round. And we can say, this is one of the things we're prioritizing, and then we pull in that other one.
So I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day is it doesn't matter where we pull it from. Can we agree as a body, and I'm just asking for discussion or consensus perhaps that this would be an amount that we could say we are committed, the county is committed for that amount, so that when they make that application, they can say, we've signaled our intent to commit to that. So that we don't just leave them with the 250, that at the end of the day, today they can walk away with. It's kind of like when you go buy a car. If you can buy the car today, I can save you 10%. If you don't buy it today, the deal is off. So that's what that's
what I am committing to, at least. But I would like to have it be in the context of this measured process of, hey, we're approving these things. But I'm saying that I want us to do 500,000 for Housing Authorities project.
okay, I feel like this was Shark Tank. So I'm going to go to Mr. Wonderful over here and ask Ken if,
You should offer thoughts to the chair.
oh, sorry.
See, this is what happens when you don't go to a candidate forum.
No, this is what happens when you want to say something so you don't forget it as you get up in age. You have to just speak
So you don't
before.
forget it.
So I was just going to ask Ken if that would be something that based on that pot of money, we could actually make that commitment today, based on how that process has been left.
Well, I'm trying to figure out where that pot of money.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So that would be
Commissioner
economic
was referring to.
EDAC money
Yes.
that they have identified for workforce development, localization of supply chain, and workforce housing.
Mhm.
So they're 2.265.
So we're talking about taking funds from what was identified for impacted industries and diverting it to nonprofit grants.
I'm proposing that we disperse 250,000 from the housing component of impacted industries, and then 250,000 from the nonprofit support.
Can I ask a question about the 422 deadline? What do
Yes.
they actually need from us by 422?
I don't know that they actually need a check. I think what they probably need is a written commitment or stated commitment.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't have to demonstrate they banked the money.
Because I don't think the tribe has a $7 million check ready for them right now.
It's usually just a commitment or a security.
And so I'm sorry, Ken, if I can try to be more specific. So when EDAC went away, when we said we have 2.6 million,
2.265.
how many? What's the
2.265430.
2.26530?
430.
430. Why is there a zero at the end? It doesn't,
430,000.
well, yeah, but it doesn't say anything when there's a zero at the end. I'm just saying as a chemist. So EDAC said for the first round of funding, we want to use 1/2 of it. And then the second round of funding, we want to do another 1.1 million in 2022. Was when they came to us because it was in 2021 and they knew we had this 1.1 and they wanted to wait to make recommendations around housing for the second tranche of money. We have the stated recommendation and prioritization from them. And that's kind of how I'm bringing in is we know that people that we've asked for advice in the business community have said we want to use some of this for housing. I know I'm trying to convince Commissioner Starrett. I'm trying to convince Ken.
No, I said, I don't care where it comes from. And just to be clear, the tribe hasn't committed yet, but they've been in discussions, so
That's what I.
we don't
that's
have
what I
a-
understand.
we don't have a,
And Commissioner Sarah, I'm reading the partnership with the tribe is to provide rental assistance for Native Americans. So that's separate from their financial commitment in the construction. Is that correct?
it's a rent-based subsidy.
So my understanding, you can. My understanding is that they've asked that the housing authority has asked the tribe to commit to a capital investment.
Okay.
And then the tribe is already committed to, or is in the process of committing to tribal-based vouchers essentially.
Exactly.
I learned stuff when I went on the shelter tour.
Well, I don't see why this wouldn't qualify as workforce housing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it
That's what it
absolutely is.
is.
The whole
Or
purpose of
affordable
it is, affordable housing for people living in the community, who
Working.
working in the community
Yeah.
rather, who want to live here.
But I will say, Chair, that I really appreciate your request because we talked about it a lot. You recognize that we can do this as long as it fits the ARPA dollars,
Mhm.
right? The ARPA, the Treasury guidance.
Sure.
But I do want to make sure that all of these organizations who applied with a very specific set of criteria, that we can honor that. And some of them, I don't necessarily, because I'm not an expert in economic development, thank you very much. I don't necessarily know how, it fits into the whole COVID response, but I do know that we've presented that framework and they've applied for it and been scored in very particular ways. So, and I will say that I'm also glad to see YCAP at the top of the list.
Yes.
Well, I think it applies to critical needs. I mean, that was one of the reasons why they were still on my list. Commissioner Sarah, you said the gap was 600,000? That they have a commitment.
Well,
funding gap of-
They're looking to do additional fundraising and they earmarked that number that they would be doing. But that this is what they're hoping that our commitment would be.
Okay,
And I'm guessing, but I don't know for certain that they've applied for what I'm just gonna call an earmark. Because they had lengthy conversations with Senate staff.
Right. And again, this is one of the things that they have acknowledged is going to require that, what we talked about earlier with the bypass, is to show the state that we have that local buy-in, and we're the only missing piece here.
One of the things I'll note to wrap into the update from HHS is that the moving into a new clinic space in Newburgh allows Virginia Garcia Medical Center to expand their footprint and have a better clinic in the building that they have them and currently are sharing. And there's also money in here as proposed and scored to help with that renovation. And Bonamici, I think it's there was a
Bonamici,
mutual
Wyden.
Senate and House earmark for them as well.
2.1 million.
That's how much. Thank you.
I am in support of that idea, although I will acknowledge that you are influencing our grant award process for something we haven't decided yet, so.
Oh my gosh.
But I think that, part of our job is to be flexible and nimble enough to make things happen, so as long as Ken is on board, it's a very furtive look.
I'm willing to find some information.
Well, I wouldn't hold up. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to make it work and what these funds are coming from. So ultimately it's the board's decision. So I just want to be clear about that. And so what staff will implement what the board prioritize and how the funds are spent. I'm just trying to figure out, because I know there was a lot of discussions, but we also went through an exercise and identified the specific funds and percentages of our allocation to dedicated to each area. And all I'm trying to backtrack because I'm trying to also understand, because at some point, as soon as decisions are made to move 250,000 or $500,000 to another program area, that means there's a program area that's now not going to be funded potentially. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm out in front of that. So then if we get further down the road, that we don't end up in a situation where we're either overcommitted or we've deviated from a lot of the process that we've been doing for the last several months. So just, that's why I'm researching on the fly.
I don't have as many buckets of money in my head, so I've already moved them in my head, and Ken actually has to put them on paper.
Mhm.
And it's not a cash flow issue because our second round comes in May, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But it is something that I'm also keeping track of as well, because we can't distribute more, we can't distribute funds that we haven't received yet. So I'm keeping an eye on, because to date, we've already put out $6.8 million in water and sewer infrastructure. And this was going to be a program that we're going to be able to fund, but then writing checks for some of the other programs that are coming up, that's going to be reliant on receipt of the second tranche
Right.
from the US Treasury. Yeah. So it's something else that I'm keeping an eye on.
And we don't anticipate that will be an issue, Commissioner, with, I mean, if we're technically pulling
It's not-
from that bucket, then we
It's
have to
not,
wait.
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't we make that part of the overall motion so that we can continue to discuss, and then that will just be part of what we ultimately decide, if that works. Okay, so now I have to adjust. Let's see.
Commissioner Kula, just to clarify,
yeah.
your suggestion is contingent upon option 3 only.
That's
which
correct.
would be reducing all of the capital requests by 50%.
That's correct. Yeah,
Because that's the only one that has 250
right.
or full funding.
And that's a way to, I mean, in my view, it's a way to take the smallest amount out of a as yet unallocated funding source, right? That the 1.1 for housing that's considered economic impact and
Right.
recovery,
Right.
while still honoring the all the work that's been done and getting the most organizations funded.
But just to be clear, that doesn't commit us to anything other than this amount in this capacity, because, I mean, if it's under option 3 or whatever, I don't know that that's germane unless I'm missing what the intent is. So in other words, where this is listed on the list, I want to make sure that doesn't impact or inform what we do going further with all the other grants and the discussion about those.
Oh, yeah, well, so Chair, if I may, my proposal is that we approve option 3 and transfer 250,000 from the EDAC economic impacted industries grant. And so that would be a very specific way of funding it within the question of H1, which is consideration of approval recommendations made.
So that means that what you're suggesting is that option 3 in totality.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that, because I think there are some other things I want to make sure we get funded, and I don't see them on here. In any event, I don't know what that discussion looks like going forward, because that would mean approving all of these.
That's correct. Yeah, and that is my proposal,
Okay.
is the recognition that this is an urgent, it's urgent. We have in different discussions prioritized housing. And so this is a way to pull from already allocated but not yet structured funding in the smallest amount possible, while still maintaining the our while acknowledging the value that our grant evaluators give us and have brought to us, while acknowledging the structure that we shared with them and keeping the process as intact as possible. So it really, it funds the thing that Commissioner Starrett says, and I agree with it, just for clarification, I agree with that we should put money into. It takes money from a process that hasn't been established yet. So we're not, or it takes money from a fund that we haven't established a process for. So we're not really wrecking a process that we've already established over there. And it recognizes all the work that's been done and what we've already approved.
That would not be something I could get behind, because there are a couple of things. I think we've got other needs that might take precedence over some of these that are on that option 3 list. So that's why I would have a.
And I recognize that. I understand what I don't know, and I will. I would ask that if you have further items that you want to add, that we find a way to fund them outside of this pot of funding, and bring them forward, perhaps as one motion even. So this is money is coming from here, this money is coming from here, to add things to it, which would not, it would not destroy, is too strong of a word, but it wouldn't circumvent the process that we've already agreed on. Because if we're going to take things off of it for no reason other than that we don't like them, then we should go back out for a whole new grant process and establish priorities and ask for new applications, in my view.
Thank you for that. And I wouldn't use the term I don't like them. I just think when we do triage here, then priority is what is a critical need. And I think there are some that would supplant those that are on this option 3 list. In terms of critical needs, I know that there are wants and there are needs. You know, if the roof is leaking, you don't put in a pool. The roof needs to be fixed. So I'm looking at critical needs, priority needs for those who are most in need, and that would mean some of these might not make the cut. That's all.
And Chair, if I would ask, can you remind me of what the criteria were for the this grant process?
So.
Scoring criteria specifically,
Sure, the
because I don't
scoring,
have it.
neither do I.
But you know,
The scoring criteria was based on the general guidelines that were established at the beginning, which was to say that the one eligibility requirement was that each organization had a stated impact from COVID-19. That's the one and only criteria from the ARPA funds. So each of them had that. And then beyond that, it was truly a matter of choose one of the 5 categories that best fits the request that you're putting forward. And there were no critical need requirements. It was simply a project, a general operating support, a capital expense, a capacity building. So to identify, you know, the area of need for your organization.
And that's what we talked about last week, was that in my view, there's kind of an executive level overlay, which is based on the economic environment that we are in the anticipation of more foreclosures and the anticipation of a recession next year, that we should make the executive decision to prioritize critical needs. The main ones would be food and housing for me.
and Chair, I recognize that you've presented that idea, and we've also had extensive discussion about why that's an inherently unfair process, since we don't actually know the projects unless we have everybody. I mean, one way to do it is to have every organization come in here and argue their case for us as to why their request meets the standards of your definition of a critical need. That's a third option besides going out for a brand new request for proposals. It would be probably a little bit chaotic, admittedly, but we could probably do it in a shorter time frame. But there's nothing here that tells us There's no number here that's the critical need prioritization, unless it's one that you're going to put on top of it. And again, to me, that's an inherently unfair thing, since that's not what people were asked to do, organizations.
Chair, I just wanted to add here, there is a synopsis on what their need was and justification for the application. Just, they're all here. If you look at remnant, you know, they talk about state cuts, 75% state cuts. That's their justification for meeting it, even outside of COVID. So I do think there's information that informs us on the need or perhaps the level of priority.
Yes, and I will note that the majority of the applications were actually 19 out of the 51 were general operating support, which tells me that a lot of people are struggling to keep staffing and basic needs going. And those, I would argue, are, you know, more critical than their wants, their needs versus wants.
And Chair, I would also remind you that the very beginning conversations in 2021, we said that we wanted to have generational impact, and that was things like investments in infrastructure of organizations, you know, like Stratus Village, right? Which is different than general operating. And so what I'm hearing is a lot of different views that are maybe changed over time, but we can't, it's inherently unfair to all these organizations and to any others who might want to apply if we're saying that this is you know, this is the new area of focus, right? Because this is just a subset of all the people who are doing good work in our county. We should go back out if that's the thing that you really want to do, is prioritize food and shelter. And if it's food and shelter for people, then there's obviously organizations on here who just don't get to, we're going to have to cross them off the list. They won't be part of it, right?
I think they would all be included, at least in, I put together something sort of.
You saw my list.
Yes, I did.
That now is adjusted because we have sort of verbally made the agreement of funding housing authority. I did go back through and analyze the choices that I had made. There's some things I would change. You mentioned Virginia Garcia and their expansion with the healthcare services that they do. That's something that I considered maybe should be on the list. However, I very strongly feel that Providence, they have a foundation because they are a very large entity and they have access to a lot of funding. And that's, you know, that's a significant award. If you look at even option 3, $232,000 essentially. Historical Society, I wouldn't argue is a critical need. The Chamber of Commerce, you know, I think if we're going to focus on critical needs nonprofits, then we probably, you know, that 501c6 organizations probably won't make the list. The Cultural Center, I was able to confirm that they have received $4.5 million of their $5 million budget for their expansion of a theater and a dance studio and a renovation of the lobby. I wouldn't argue that that's a critical need when we have food and housing issues. And those
Chair-
are just some examples, but that's, you know, those are the entities that I'm not comfortable with awarding money to when we have these issues happening.
And I would say, I would come back to, this is a new priority that you've placed on it. It's not what we agreed to. If we're gonna, if a majority of the board wants to do that, we need to give people the opportunity to apply again or make their case to us again. And that might be different people that are on this list, because if we're gonna say that this list no longer has relevance in terms of its applications because people weren't applying for critical need work, then there probably are other organizations. I mean, the Sharon Lina Food Pantry, like we should probably ask them to apply, right? I'm just thinking that there are a lot of organizations that aren't on this list and maybe they should be applicants. But this,
Well,
again,
this is
it's not.
what's in front of us. And, you know, I'm saying that this is, to go back to last week's discussion, this is a recommendation. It is not, we must do this, nor were any of these organizations told that if they did apply, that any ranking would be upheld by the BOC. And I do think this, considering the economic situation that we're in, considering what we know that some of these organizations do for people in our county, I feel that it warrants some triage of the list.
And what I would ask is if we are, so there's lots of hypotheticals that I could create from that. We could put all the money towards Stratus Village, right? Like we could put all the money to YCAP, right, if we wanted to. But presumably there's an intent to spread this out around organizations around the county who have an express need that we also value. At this moment, the list that is in front of us, based upon scoring, is not one that you can say, oh, I value number 52 more than the score for number 1, and you would be, you have the power to do that. Is it right? I don't think it's right. I don't think that it's right for us to say, we gave you a set of criteria, you applied for that, and only you applied for that. And now of this group, we're actually going to put new criteria onto it. Do you see what I'm saying? And if your criteria for a critical need, because that's the one thing I've heard, I remember that we agreed upon generational impact, and we agreed that generational impact was things like the investment in investments, right? Rather than general operating, and you're valuing general operating over capital investments.
But some of the work that they do, that general operating funds cover, have generational impact. I would argue food assistance and housing is absolutely generational impact.
And I would just add that, and I keep dragging up remnant initiatives as the example. And when you talk about generational impact, that is an operating expense that they are not able to meet, not because of anything they've done other than that there were state grants that were pulled. And generational impact can never be more illustrated than someone getting out of prison and not going back to prison. And again, the work that they do for the county. So whatever category it comes under, I think at the end of the day, we could kick around, well, it's not fair. We asked a group to score it this way. I think it's inherently unfair that we take money from other people, okay? And that is what government disperses. We don't create anything on our own. Government gives away money they took from other people. We are given a pot of money, good, bad, or indifferent, and we are tasked with doing I believe, the most good for our community. You can always make the argument that a theater group or or let's say the cultural center, contribution to our community cannot be dismissed. It's very important to have those elements, but I also think it's important for us to acknowledge the immediate needs, and I believe it has to do with the basics. And we're not at a place where we can ignore the fact that we've got an inflation rate that's destroying people's ability to buy food and pay their rent. That's going to be my lens, no matter how it was structured. That's going to be my lens in how we support these organizations. So I can't justify, writing a check from other people's money for the cultural center, for instance, for a dance studio, or for the gallery theater that they worked hard and they make a contribution. But when we're looking at folks that are, trying to eat, I can't do that. And I just don't feel comfortable being part of that being part of my, what I've agreed to.
And Chair, if I may, I appreciate your thoughts. I also know that there are other ways, both with American Rescue Plan dollars and other dollars, to fund remnant, for example. You have identified that eating and housing is important, and that those are the only things that you want to. Oh no, it's not the only things.
No.
So there are other things that you're going to prioritize when you look at the list.
Yes, I'm looking at things, in other words, if we've got a contract with Homeward Bound Pets, it's cheaper for us to give them money than it was for us to build a new shelter. And I was at the beginning of that process when we had animal control out of the fairgrounds, but we didn't have enough money to build and redo that shelter. So we wound up having to find someone else who could, and if they can't do it, it's gonna be a whole lot cheaper than us building a new shelter. So I'm looking at sort of mitigating some of the costs we'd have down the road. So it might not just be, food and shelter, but there are gonna be other things like domestic violence or child abuse. Those to me are critical.
Okay, and I totally appreciate that, and I really think that we should go out, now that we're getting more clarity around the priorities of the board, we should actually do a new proposal then, a request for proposals or a request for grant applications, right? Because this is something that the community needs the opportunity to ask or to like share their stories on, I think. And if you want to insist upon us using your criteria rather than the criteria that we already agreed on as a board unanimously and put out to the community, then I need to have every application in front of me with the opportunity for me to score it based upon the criteria that the majority of the board of commissioners has identified.
Have you not seen the summaries? Because I've got them here.
I've seen the summaries, but a summary is not the whole application.
What would be different other than seeing what their, thumbnail sketch of what their needs are?
Well, Chair has expressed that she looked deeply into how much money, for example, each organization has at their disposal. So as an example, I was an OCF grant evaluator for Western Oregon recently. And so I actually got all of the financials for the organizations. It's pretty handy, right? Because you're actually able to put in context their request. We didn't ask for that information. We didn't ask for that information. Emphasis, we didn't ask for that information. And that's why they didn't share it with us. But it seems like it would be valuable. And Chair Bershauer has pulled some of that information in. That's great, but we should really be looking at it for everybody, I think.
Well, I think we're just doing our due diligence. And if
Yeah.
I look over here and look at some information, for instance, about what the Housing Authority has put together, or Commissioner Bershauer does, I think the object of the game is for us to do due diligence.
Yeah.
Well, before we start handing out these checks. And your due diligence and my due diligence are going to be different aspects. So,
But Chair, I'm sorry, you're not Chair.
no, but I guess I would just say
Go
that
ahead, I'm trying to-
Okay,
that I think that we can talk about process and the hard work that people put in. But for me, again, it will never be justifiable to give money to the wants over the needs. And that again is something we could continue to discuss.
yeah, totally. And your list of needs has grown in the course of our conversation. And so it feels like it's an ever moving target. If I say, oh, we're looking at this from the perspective of shelter for humans and food for humans, but then you've added in domestic violence and you've added in Homeward Bound. Those are amazing organizations that we should fund. I agree, but they're different than food for humans and shelter for humans.
It wasn't limited to, it was priorities would include, and the critical need is for a woman who can't go home because her husband's beating her up, but she's got a place to go. That to me is a critical need.
Yeah, and so you said I get to do my due diligence, and you get to do your due diligence, and you get to, and I'm gonna say that my due diligence would be to ask every organization to resubmit their information with the financials that are that they're okay with having be a public record, as a way of saying it, so that I can find out how many FTEs every organization has, what their annual revenue is, what they've already placed, what have other people committed to each of these projects. That's something that I think would be very helpful to know, but I need to have that for every organization, not just the ones I like or don't like, or that I view as a critical need or not a critical need. And so that's what I'm hearing. I've proposed that we fund option 3 plus 250,000 for the Housing Authority. I cannot in good conscience just look at this list and make priorities without having further information from each organization.
Thank you.
In response, I will just say that's not what I was after. I wasn't after the deep dive on financials. I was after the unique ARPA money that we are seeing come out of the federal government and where those disbursements are going. This list is very familiar. It's small, right? It's the same people applying for the grants on a state level, through their legislature, on a city level, and through the county level. And so I was just curious to see who had received funds. And that does make a difference for me, to know that the cultural center is almost fully funded, right? And we have people on our list that haven't received a dime. So for my own lens, that does make a difference. I will also say that, we just made a verbal decision to essentially move one of these folks over to impacted industries, workforce, affordable housing. Not to complicate this further, but why wouldn't we make that decision for other people on the list and decide to fund?
I think that's a reasonable question, Chair. My proposal, of course, was contingent upon funding option 3 with the 250,000 pulled over with the rationale that I provided. I do want to note, though, that your desire was to see whose project was more fully funded or not through American Rescue Plan dollars. And my due diligence and my consideration would be how big of an organization are they? And, things like what percentage of their own money are they applying to this project, that kind of thing. Because I think it's really important for me to note that like Providence Health Foundation or Medical Foundation, I learned is a relatively small organization that is associated with Providence Health Systems. I think it's important to note that Housing Authority is a fairly large organization, and yet it's really expensive to build affordable housing, and they need all the help they can get. So from my perspective, while you want a very specific set of information that I would love to have as well, for full disclosure, it would be helpful for me to have that too. I want to make sure that I have the information about the scale of the organization, because that's important to me.
Okay.
Just, I know, like, if I'm looking at this list, I know that some of these are smaller and I know that some of them are probably larger, but I don't know.
So are you proposing that we delay this discussion until you can receive that information?
I'm proposing that we fund option 3 plus 250,000 from impacted industries. But if you, and the reason I say that, I'm not trying to be silly with it, is that I'm pointing out that if we don't have the information here or in the application to score them on our own based upon the criteria, that I think it's important that we have an agreed criteria that the board agrees to. I also want to make sure that my own criteria get some validity in my own scoring, which is the information about how big they are, how many FTEs, annual budgets, whether they're making a profit or they're losing money. That's important to me.
Chair, I have a suggestion, if I may. I think that we all have a different idea of where this money should go. Obviously, that's the donkey's in the ditch. How do we get the donkey out? The donkey that's in the ditch is we're not in agreement on how this money should be spent based on the process that we ask people to go through and where we find ourselves now. So the only thing that I would say is that information is available on any of these organizations. And if it is important to each commissioner, that's information that one should basically get and help inform. So at this point, what I would suggest is everybody come with based on everything you've got and everything you can get, come back with your list of, this is where I think just ballpark, this is where I feel comfortable making the executive decision that the money should go. Otherwise, we'll spend another couple of weeks and people are missing out on getting some checks. That's what I would recommend.
Well, I think Commissioner Kula has stated that he wants this list. So I put forward a list last week. It hasn't changed much. I don't agree with leaving McMinnville Habitat for Humanity off of the recommendation list, or UNIDOS, or MV Advancements, or the Gospel Rescue Mission, or some of these other very critical organizations. So I'd have to adjust my list a little bit if we are going to continue with the 500,000 for Housing Authority, but it doesn't change much. So
No, I was just going to say, I put together kind of just a basic list, but I also had some questions, like for instance, about search and rescue and trying to take the other organizations and make sure that we've got something available for them. So I had a question about that, but I just put a question mark there. I had a question about COVID funding, for instance, for UNIDOS, and Director Manfred was able to share some information that helped me inform that. So based on that, I put together a list, and I just had some questions, but it was again, just a ballpark.
The only part that I just wanted to just kind of put out there for just a reminder that based on the criteria that was adopted and the 52 applications that we did receive through the program, the total request was $8.5 million. And there's $2.2 million available. So kind of keeping in mind that there's a difference there with $6 million, more than $6 million in requests that, and one thing that I look at when you look at some of these processes, it's not really a lot of times how you say yes, but it's justification on why you said no to some of the funding requests. And it's really important, at least when I look at it from a process wise, why we have this scoring criteria, why we invest the time in the front to talk about the information that we're going to collect. We look at the eligibility, we look at the criteria, we look at the scoring criteria, and we make sure that we're funded. It's not necessary. Yes, it is to justify why we were funding this, but it's also to provide an explanation. So when Carrie starts getting the phone calls on, well, I was recommended here and I wasn't funded, or when I start getting the calls, or you get the calls on why wasn't I funded, or even having an argument over, or a discussion around housing, because there's more than one organization that applied for funding that also has a housing proposal. So, how does one get funded, and how, what was the justification that the other one does, and so again, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, again, is really why I kind of fall back and I embrace processes that we work on in how we do this. And I don't really have an answer or even a recommendation on how best to proceed at this point. I think there's a couple options available if we, if the board wants to do an additional review with the scoring criteria on that, or if you want to review the list. And because I'm also trying to figure out on how staff can support the decision and ensure that that what's being funded is what the board intends to have funded, and make sure that we have sufficient resources to cover that. So, at that, I don't have a recommendation. I just wanted to just take a moment and just realize that it's a daunting challenge to look at this, because we did have a large number of applications that come through. And based on the funding that we have available, we can't fund them all. And so how do we filter that and come to a decision on what's going to be funded? And I'm looking at Carrie and Christian, if you have any other thoughts or recommendations.
I would say that, the project description that has been referred to, I think is important. It's a very brief summary to sort of be able to allow the evaluators to kind of wrap their heads around the scope of a project without getting into the details. But the rest of the application and the rest of the scoring is based on quantitative data. And when you look, for instance, at the two largest questions in the application, they have 7 or 8 subparts. Each of those are to allow the evaluator to assign a score based on very specific criteria. I'm uncomfortable with how anecdotal the conversation gets because the applications have not been reviewed by anyone other than the selection committee. And there is very specific quantitative information in there. There's information about potential impact, scope of impact, number of people impacted, service areas, budget size, any variances on budget, all that information is in there and has produced a score. And that is what you have in front of you.
Commissioners, I hear the concerns, but I also think that, as Commissioner Starrett said last week, the buck stops with us, and that the conversations aren't meant to be anecdotal. They are meant to inject some, what I would call common sense into the discussion in terms of where the limited dollars are being focused and why. I had some conversations over the past week with people who do not agree with me politically because I wanted to get their take on this list and where the priorities might be. And they had the same reaction, that we should not be spending limited one-time federal funds for COVID economic relief on what they would consider wants versus needs. So I don't feel that we are out of bounds in having this discussion. I think it's necessary. But there's certain people on this list, certain organizations on this list that I would consider a want and not a need. And I'm not willing to fund or vote to fund. For.
And Chair, I just want to, you used some very specific words. And I just want to note that this is a specific fund pot of money for helping nonprofits who can act as the engines. I think you call them our marvelous nonprofit partners yesterday. I wrote that down. So these are organizations that have either struggled or struggled to serve struggling people over the course of the pandemic. And we are, the goal in my understanding is that we're using the money that we've established in this bucket of money to either help them continue to serve the community members or to jumpstart our economy, right? They're part of what the nonprofits do that are arrayed here. And that was part of the questions and the evaluation of the story for them. If you have obviously you have a different idea about which of these should be funded and in which particular order and in which particular amounts. And they've come to us with a particular set of ideas about what they want funded, right? There's specific projects. So it's not just a name that's here, it's a name plus a project, right? And I think that's an important thing to remember. There's a name that's of a nonprofit or the chamber, for example. The chamber is not listed on here as it didn't score highly enough. One of the chambers did, the other chamber didn't. But we've established criteria. I understand that you feel comfortable taking the information we have and establishing your own scoring criteria. I don't think that it helps our community in really any way to not, if you insist upon having a different criteria than we've established here, I don't think it helps anybody to then do your own scoring and put together your own list. I think that the community and the people, to honor them, we should actually ask them again if we're going to insist upon different criteria.
Well, I'll expand a little bit on that. So I'm looking at my list, my revised list. Most of these, almost all of them on my list are not what I would consider applications that were submitted with an economic benefit per se. So like, for instance, the cultural center, the testimony coming in on that in the application was very heavily centered on the economic impact to Newburgh and the surrounding communities, right? So, and I talked a little bit in my meeting with Ken about this. It feels wrong to compare an application, whether it's a nonprofit or not, but to compare an application that is economically driven versus something that is a nonprofit that does critical work in the community that is not focused necessarily on economic impact, but that may be sort of a ripple effect, but really critical needs. Doesn't it feel fair to do that? Sure. Perhaps it is that we ask a lot of these individuals to reapply for our impacted industries grant. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. We haven't had that discussion. But I can see somebody like the Cultural Center applying for an economic impact grant because that's what they're arguing they will have. So I'm not really, I don't view this as we're closing a door. I think that we went through this process and clearly we've had some issues with it, right? But we could potentially shift some of these folks over to another bucket of money that might be more appropriate and fund there.
I would also add, impacted industries is not broadly for-profit or economic development businesses. That was very specifically targeted through the EDAC. And none of these people would be eligible for that pot of money.
Right.
Based on the stated criteria of EDAC and of that program as it is right now.
Because that's workforce
Okay.
training, childcare.
Well, childcare is
Oh, yeah,
separate, but it's
childcare is
impacted
separate.
industries is workforce development, workforce housing, and localization of supply chain. That is not this.
Well, some of them would, though. I mean, we just moved somebody over, housing authority. You know, I
And
would
we're happy.
argue individuals in community living would, right? Habitat for Humanity might.
I'm sorry, what was the one before?
No,
for
Habitat.
Humanity?
I mean, you could ask them,
Community home builders. That's
they could
workforce
structure their
development.
application to highlight the elements of their project that apply and align with that. But what you're going to be asking then is for a wider pool that then whatever your selection committee looks like has to weed through in some other way.
And I would just say that Commissioner Starrett has expressed that we have differences of opinion about what we value and what we want, who we want, the organizations that we want to award. For me, that's actually not it. I think that all of these organizations that are on this list have their own value in their own area. But what we specifically charged the grant evaluators with was, and Carrie, you talked about this last week about how this was them scoring it in essentially in a vacuum as how impactful this will be. Is it a nonprofit? Has it experienced
Right.
A decline or a challenge by COVID? And what's the big impact? What's the size of the impact? And that's what drove the priority, the score, and not like in the whole pool, right? Because the person would have to look at all of them and they only looked at a subset, right? Because they only looked at a certain number.
Well, it's how you would achieve equanimity. I mean, you can't look at a YCAP or a Providence and compare it to remnant initiatives. You can't on any sort of scale that you can do quantitatively. So
Right.
you have to be able to take them individually. They were not scored as categories. They were hand delegated. So the assignments were made so that people had a variety of size organizations that they would then review. Keeping in mind also that there's a very different level of sophistication in some of these larger organizations that have staff that are year-round grant writers. And, you know, we recommend that in the budget, you know, the only thing we ask in the budget is what are the revenue sources towards this project and what are your expenditures? And, you know, we want to make sure that these are well documented and that we have a good demonstrated community partnership. And that's something that we also scored them on is, you know, do you have community partnerships? And those are at different levels for each of these organizations. But I would say that the intent, what I understood the board's intent at the beginning of this was to support the broad ecosystem that is the nonprofit organizations in the county, irrespective of particular size or particular segments of the population served, and to create something that would be open to the mutual benefit.
Chair, if I could say something about this, when we think about the term nonprofit, so many things come to mind as we see on this list, folks who have applied. There are nonprofits and there are nonprofits. You can pretty much build a nonprofit around any particular activity or group or interest. And so I think we need to keep that in mind. That being said, even though there is a broad range of nonprofits, the nonprofits, at least in my mind, that I think need to be funded because of the significance of the need, would definitely not include nonprofits that are sort of peripherally involved. In other words, there's a not, we see it, we see nonprofits that are life and death things, or to some significant infrastructure in our county. So I think we could spend, I don't know, hours talking about this. Ultimately, what I see, and not to usurp the chair's job here, is that we could sit here for hours and have this discussion. And what's before us is what do we as a board intend to fund? That's the question. And
Chair, I would love to see if there's going to be something different than what all these organizations have been asked about their particular projects, is that we really go back to them with clarification on it. I don't think, well, so I will say, I don't have the tools to identify projects and argue for or against them, any of them in the context of this meeting here right now. And so that means that it's not fair to the organizations, all of them that have applied.
I think that's a very involved process, and I think it's going to take a lot of staff time and, a reiteration of what we just did. I'm not sure that's the best plan. I think that we need to have a little bit of expediency in getting these dollars out the door. But just to kind of go back and reiterate that, none of these processes are without controversy. But what I don't want to get into a situation is where we have a limited pool of money, and I'm going through the city of Newburgh. We love Newburgh, to pick on Newburgh, but I'm going through their ARPA awards, and they have $260,000 that they gave out for outdoor seating, marketing, and sculptural landing pads. I mean, I'm not sure that our constituents would come forward after seeing a list similar to that and say, yeah, we feel like that was a critical COVID economic or health related relief, an appropriate award. I don't want to get into that situation. And I'm also mindful of the fact that we have other buckets of money that are really geared towards economic projects with economic specific relief tied to their award. So for this, and we talked about this, perhaps this was a flaw in setting up this grant process where we didn't get more specific on how we view the role of nonprofits in our county and what we would have prioritized for these funds. Clearly, we didn't have as robust discussion as we probably should have, because we're having it now. But for me, if I'm going to sign or vote, it's got to be, I have to feel like the money is going towards the organizations who do the critical needs, who intersect with the most vulnerable families and individuals in our county, and who are doing that hard work, who often, don't have access to funds. They're not a large organization necessarily, like Providence or some of the other ones, but who are still in need of money and are going to be the groups that carry us through. God forbid we have a recession, who are going to carry us through and help our families through. So that's where.
Can you give, so I got, don't have access to money, not a large organization, doing the hard work of holding up families and individuals. Because I'd like to have some criteria that I'm like thinking about.
Well, it's the same conversation I've been having for the past week. But
Yes, but the don't have access to money, I think, was a new one to me. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it in context of the applications for projects.
don't have access to money, just don't typically have the resources, maybe a grant writer like Providence might have, right? They're smaller organizations.
I know
Commissioner
that.
Sarah, I would love to see if you have sort of an idea or a list. I know you just talked about this, maybe it's too soon.
well, I had some questions and I had them answered. I would change my amounts. based on the fact that the housing authorities has been taken care of. So basically, I do have a list, and what I'm wondering is if everybody comes with their list, just come with your list with a ballpark allocation based on the money we have to give out, based on your best guess on how this is going to be best utilized. Then I think then we just look at each other's proposals and go from there. I do have something, but it's very different now that we've got, I've had some questions answered. I still have some questions. And so there are question marks, again, about some of these organizations, but I put something together.
Which one, Sherry?
So,
And then Chair, I would say that if we're going to come back at another meeting, I need to have one other commissioner approval in order to request that staff make requests to the applicants. So I just want to put that out there, right? I can't ask staff to do work without having another person on board.
So Commissioner Starrett, is your thought then, if you have 3 different lists, that you first start with the commonalities? Is that what you're suggesting?
so maybe we will come to some agreement on some of these and we can go from there. This is all just very high level and based on, again, there were some questions that have been answered and some amounts, like for instance, Virginia Garcia and Unidas, we can add more money there. I was trying to check with Director Manfrin about some other funding. So that answered some questions. So there can be an increase there. And this is just real ballpark.
So, okay, so Hyatt goes down to 250, so that frees up about 150 there.
So Henderson House asked for 58,000 and you want to give them 50,000. And is there a reason why there's numbers that are different than their request?
No, I said this was really basic,
Okay.
high level. I haven't got down to this is just me just putting something really, really high level down just for argument's sake in terms of, so this is not here's what I think. This is just an idea of what I was working on.
If you know the organizations on the list that you are not willing to fund, it might be worthwhile to give us an opportunity to take them out of the calculation and see what you'd be left with
Yeah.
before you decide that you have to completely abandon this selection process. Because you've mentioned 5, 6, 7, 8 organizations that are coming off. And I don't have each of their requests memorized, but that might undoubtedly have a significant impact on the overall ranking.
Yeah, there's a couple ways because I think approaching it from the scoring, because if each individual commissioner wants to do an additional review of the applications and whether it's like Carrie was suggesting, which is a do not consider or not interested. So on proposals or because one of the ideas that I had last week was that I didn't present, but another thought would be is there's a second round of reviews that each commissioner goes through and looks at the list of projects. And then there's kind of a, whether it's scoring or just as simple as a check mark. And then we apply a point to however many check marks are next to that, that then is added to the score that the review committee did. We could see how that plays out to where you would review all 52 applications and, for each check mark, there's a score that would be added to the review. So then we could add that to the review committee score and see if that changes the dynamics or has an effect in changing what the priority for funding looks like. And then we were able to, because there's two, we have to first prioritize and then we have to look at the funding available and the funding options and see where that fund or not fund line is.
Okay.
The other option, and I'm just going to put this out there, and this is probably this, I would call this more of the nuclear option or kind of that looking at the process would be, if there's a challenge, the other option would be is you split the 2.2 million into 3 buckets. You review the applications and we make sure we don't have any duplicates, and essentially each commissioner, much in the same way that the state did it, for some of their ARPA funds. They took those funds when we were identified from Senator Boquist for those funds to come for rural broadband. The other approach would be as each commissioner has set amount, you look at the applications up to that amount. You submit those to staff. If there's duplications, then we come back and say, well, one commissioner has already
Ranked
funded
choice
that.
voting, right?
And we come up with a list of, I'm not sure how many organizations get funded out of that, but then it would be, each commissioner would have $755,000 essentially available to fund, of the 52 projects. So that's my more, again, the more radical stepping away from the process. Again, we still have the applications. You still have the recommendations and the scoring that the reviewers provided to help guide those decisions, and the materials in front of you to determine how best to do it. But again, those are just a couple of the only 2 ideas that I have at this point.
And I will say that I recognize the practical value of the second, your second idea.
Don't have to call it the nuclear option.
Oh, yeah, right.
So
It should be something alliterative like the architects had, and some cute name. But for the community, I think there's a lot of value in us finding agreement.
And I think we can. That's why I was going to suggest, and I like Ken's suggestions because they make sense and they're a little more streamlined. But I'm thinking, what if we were all to just sort of put our ideas on paper and then collate them, if you will. And I think we might find more commonality than we appear to be having here. And everyone's going to come with a different lens, and then we distill that down, and that's what we get the sort of the essential oil of what this is all about. So I don't know.
So I have a couple of, I understand what you mean. And then I have a couple of requests that I would make of staff that I need to have one commissioner back me up on the value of in order for them to take the time for it. And I'd like to have, for example, it's a very specific one, which is I'd love to know how much money over the past, I don't want to go back too far, but how about the past 7 years, so that'd be your previous full term and my term, how much money have we allocated to each of these organizations across departments? And so that's a little bit more work, because like HHS, for example, but to me, it would be very helpful. Hopefully for you, it would be very helpful to know, like, where are they getting money from us already?
We did ask that. That's in there.
Okay,
We asked everybody who had received any money from the county, either grants or contracts in the last 5 years.
Okay.
And then to also make a statement about how they completed that process.
Okay,
or that
great.
Project.
so even contracts, not just grants, right? Okay, super. And some of them, I was looking at, for example, Commissioner Sterrett, your list, and the Gospel Rescue Mission, you've added it, but it's ranked 47th on this list. And so I would have a hard time ranking it on the top of my list. So that's, there's some of those.
Well, I'm just looking at the raw facts about what the Gospel Rescue Mission does,
Mhm.
and the people that basically come off the street and can barely function, and then they wind up getting great jobs and living wonderful lives. That to me is it might be ranked 47 on somebody else's list.
Yeah.
That's pretty high
But
on
it's
the
high
list
on
of
your list.
community need. That's in my estimation. So
Yeah.
again, I don't know why we couldn't put together our own list and then come back with it, but then again, we could be here for days talking about this. So I'm gonna I've already said my piece.
Okay, and so the other request that I have that would be require staff to do some work is the FTEs of the organization, which would just be a request to them, to those organizations, and their annual budget. So I just would like to have their request in the context of their organization.
I'm a little leery of asking staff to do work that I think, legwork that I think we can do. If anything, any particular data point, unless it's already been captured, I think that if, for instance, if we were to say to Ken, hey, here's more stuff for you to do, I'm not going to do that. Anything I want, I'm going to go figure it out on my own. I'm not going to go ask somebody else to do this unless it's readily available or it's in some of the applications. You know, to me, that's not a point that I'm interested in. I'm interested in what do they do and what do they need. And so again, this could be all day. We could be here and I don't think it's productive.
And
It
so
would be
I will say,
simple to do that.
what's
I
that?
I could add those two questions to the existing application, put everyone's back in progress, and then send an email to everyone saying, go in and answer those.
Right, that's what I was thinking, is that it's not that hard of a process since you have it would be very challenging for me to find a contact for every one of these 52 organizations and then get that in time. That would be, but because it exists within our database,
Okay.
it seemed like a simple one to request.
Can
And
we-
it's valuable to me. I recognize that you don't think it's valuable, but the scale of the organization, you expressed, like, well, some of these don't have grant writers. And I think that to me, that is one of the data points.
Sure.
So what happens if there's no response or significant response by next Thursday?
I mean,
They
then
will.
it wouldn't be
They will.
in the response that I get. Right now.
Okay.
I mean, ideally, it would be before next Thursday.
Okay, so we have the list of prior funding already, so that would be fairly easy. And Carrie, you're saying that would be fairly relatively simple thing for you to do in terms of just sending out
Annual operation budget
To
and FTE, total
Data,
FTE.
Yeah.
The only part that I would just highlight again is just kind of getting back to process, we can again go out and ask those questions. It's what the board, how you're going to use that to help determine, is it going to narrow the list? Is it going to extend the list? Is it going to, how are you, how is it going to score the applications, or how is it going to make that determination?
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's a missing piece that I just want to make sure that we can ask all the questions and we can get the information to come back, but then what do we do with that information? Is it an additional scoring criteria based on those responses? Is it, and who's going to do that scoring and what that's going to look like to filter the list? I understand that each commissioner is going to have additional questions that they would like answered on specific applications, but my concern or my recommendation is we could get that additional information and then we'll be back to the same spot next week as far as a discussion on how do we determine how we're going to filter it. So it's just something that I just wanted to put it out there, and something to think about, that I think it would be really important to come out of today's session with maybe an idea on of how we're going to filter, how we're going to be able to move to the next step.
And sorry, Ken,
Yeah.
I should have clarified that in the context of 3 commissioners looking at the list and prioritizing it, Commissioner Stara is perhaps using different priorities than I'm using. I don't know, maybe we are using the same additional scoring criteria. For me, it's important to know, the how much money have they received from the county in the past? What's the scale of the organization?
Right.
And it's not to set aside the biggies, and it's not to include the biggies, but I think it's important for the project request that's before, because it's not we're not funding the organization so much as we're entrusting the organization to do the project with the money that we have set aside for that.
So that being said, so what I'm hearing is we're looking at the board, each commissioner is going to do a review of the applications and come up with that list.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would prefer to just.
An additional
I'm
scoring.
not going to go through and
No.
score every application.
Mm-mm. I'm not.
I've already reviewed all of them in terms of what was given to me, the summaries and what was asked. So I think if you do ask for it, it's simply because you would like another set of data to look at. I mean, I don't know how we incorporate that into a scoring or a ranking.
You're gonna have 3 different lists. And you're gonna have 3 different lists with 3 different amounts for each potential. So the first thing you would do is identify any commonality. And then after that, I guess you go one at a time.
And I would come back to, I appreciate the process. We were the ones responsible for creating the process. I take responsibility for that. And I'd like to see option 3 plus the 250,000 additional for Strats, the Strats project.
Okay.
But in the context of not having that go forward, I think that the process as described by Carrie just now is the one that I'm most comfortable with. But I need to see the whole application, and I haven't seen the whole application.
I can get you that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say, Chair, that I have looked at the summaries. I've looked at the body of work of each organization, and I'm going to, I'm going to pretty much go with a couple of criteria here, and I've listed them. It's definitely going to change. This is just draft 1, but I'd like to see what everybody's thoughts are and what everyone thinks that the allocation should be, and I think we go from there.
And just to clarify, Commissioner Cliff, you are looking for FTE and total budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was also looking for how many
And
prior funding, but that is in the application, and I'm excited to see that.
okay. I appreciate the suggestion of us going through and scoring. What I don't want to get into is a situation where we're being bombarded and lobbied for whole 51 applications because some people are thinking that we're going to be the ones scoring. So I do think that this process, getting some more information, coming up with our own grant proposal or proposal for awards is probably the happy medium.
And Chair, I would welcome being bombarded. And I also think that if we could get this and your proposal into the package that hasn't been, so that people, so that's in the public record, so people can see specifically what you're proposing as of some date in the past too, that would be helpful.
Yeah, this would change significantly based on a couple of questions I had. I still have questions that
Yeah.
haven't been answered, so this is not even close to, the
Okay.
final
Okay.
iteration.
But I look forward to hearing from the organizations further.
Did we
First one.
include the option A, B, and C in the packet before? I don't think we did.
Yeah, the original ABC, yes.
Yes, we did.
Is that 1, 2, 3?
Uh,
Or is there
yes.
a
It is
different one
1,
that's
2, 3.
ABC?
I'm sorry, it is 1, 2,
Because
3.
all of a sudden I got a song in my head.
Yeah. Oh,
Please
1, 2,
don't.
3. It's not ABC, sorry. Okay, so what I'm hearing is the consensus is that we are each going to come forward with a list of a proposal, a list of grant awards. In order to get them into, well, I mean, I don't know how you get them in the packet in a timely manner without saying, commissioners, you have to have them submitted by tomorrow at 5 p.m.
Well, we have things that exist. We have your proposal from the other day, and we have a,
No, this is.
that you don't want
This
it set.
this was really just ballpark, and it's so different now that I really don't want this to be, what I'm trying to suggest to everyone is that everybody just kind of look at what I threw together. And it's not contingent upon changes today. I still have questions about several organizations.
Mhm.
Again, real high level. So
Yeah.
it's not what I would present to you.
Got it.
So in order to have some time to get the answers that you are seeking, then perhaps we should put this on the agenda in 2 weeks. Does that seem reasonable?
I mean, I think we should have it on the agenda for next week.
do
But I
too,
wanted to
I'm just
ask-
trying to-
I can
Uh,
put those on there today and, that will be very easy for people
Responses will
to.
start coming in.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be pretty easy for people to go in and just plug those two numbers in.
Yeah, those are numbers that they will have.
Yeah. But how quickly will they have those ready so that you can have that to create your list?
Mhm.
I think it would be reasonable to ask them to have that done by Monday. But
Yeah.
that just gives you a smaller. window.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
so can we shoot for, Tuesday evening? Have those submitted? For Thursday? I don't want to get into a situation where we're submitting at 5 o'clock on Wednesday. Nobody's had a chance to see that.
Well, I will have, it's funny sound, I will for sure have my list here with us at 10 a.m. on Thursday. But I do recognize that I have on the record asked people to bombard me with their thoughts about these too. So
That's you,
yes,
not,
coolest@co.yenho.or.us. I'm good at that one. Oh, plus BOC info.
and they're saying, thank you very much, Commissioner. Appreciate that.
And then are we providing any analysis prior to Thursday?
I don't think so, just the information, whatever information you get back.
So then basically is the recommendation that we come back with a basic suggestion,
A proposal.
a proposal, okay,
I think for the
Thursday.
total amount.
for
For the
Thursday,
total
for the
amount.
total amount, okay.
Similar to what we've sort of submitted as starting points, but yeah, finalized.
More refined,
Mhm.
okay.
Okay, so we will get organized here. Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Stewart, can I ask you one thing while we're still on this subject?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, I can ask you, but you don't necessarily have to answer. You put down 15,000 for street mom, but their request is 158,000. It's,
Yeah, that's, again, like I
'cause
said,
it's just like a,
it was, they were getting nothing.
yeah,
So, yeah, they were getting nothing.
okay, that's, I wanted to make sure that there was,
Sure.
you had a reason in there. I'm sure you did. Okay.
This is definitely going to be subject to significant revision. I want to make sure they had something.
Mhm.
And remember, everybody, when people are applying for grants, it's sort of typical that they ask for shoot for the moon type of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And thanks staff for your patience while we talk through these things.
Clear it up this here. Commissioners, do we want to vote on the housing authority and just get that off of, get it off the plate?
Well-
And proceed assuming that we've done.
This would be how much from this fund?
Actually.
We would have to
we have-
revise
We
what
have
the,
to vote, don't we? Because the deadline is the 22nd.
I heard the 24th,
22nd.
22nd.
That's the day after next week. So I think it might be nice if we did vote, if we're confident in that funding package, and then when you put your proposal together, just assume that it's already been approved.
Oh,
How much?
for
Would
250.
we would take the agenda item number 3 off the agenda and have it as part of old business H1 with that whole new motion and a whole new recommendation.
No, I'm saying, would it be beneficial, since we seem to be in a verbal agreement to send 500,000 to Housing Authority, to do that today? So it's not waiting to the last minute for them, and they can proceed with knowing that the county is sending this money.
No, what I'm saying is, where do we want this to be? Do we want it to be a new motion under H1 or a revision of I3?
I think we just keep it as I3.
I would keep it as I3.
Okay.
And then let's have some discussion when we get to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the
we will-
moment, we have 2.2 in this bucket of money.
2.26543.
Zero,
No,
right?
it-
Isn't there a zero? I
The
thought
other
there was a
one's
zero at the
zero.
end. And then, so we have that right now. We're continuing H1 to next week.
Yes, so we're still technically on H1. We are going to continue the discussion on the nonprofit organization grant program to next week, the 21st. So we're moving on to item I, other business. Item I1 is consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County and Tillamook County for space available detention bed rental at the rate of $168 per bed per day, effective July 1st, 2022, with an automatic renewal clause on a year-by-year basis. And Commissioners, I will move approval of item I1. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Item I2, consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County and the Association of Oregon Community Mental Health Programs, AOCMHP, in the amount of $50,000 for participation in the Rapid Engagement Oregon pilot.
Chair, I move approval.
Thank you. Commissioner Starrett moves approval. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Okay, item I3, consideration of approval of $500,000 of Yamhill County American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, fund grant awards for the Stratus Capital Project, which is under the Housing Authority of Yamhill County.
And then Chair, I have a suggestion for this one. I mean, this is the thing you brought up, and I just wanted to suggest that we start just right now by saying that this money comes out of the 2.26358 million. So this is a fully funded request. That's what I would propose, is that it comes from the 500,000 just for this, since we're focused on this, but.
I thought we discussed taking 250 out of economic impact industries.
Right, so that was my proposal when we were funding option 3. I'm not sure, since we know that this was a request for 500,000 directly from this. The reason why I proposed it as part of option 3 was that it was a 250,000 listing here, and then 250,000 from impacted industries. Since that's not happening, my thought is let's fund their total thing and agree that we want to fund their total ask.
I don't know why we would further complicate that. Appreciate that. But Ken, is this something that would be a convoluted process for us to do it that way? Shore up another 250 for the other grant requests?
Oh, I'm sorry, Chair. I mean, just from the 2.2.
No, I know.
Oh, okay.
But what I was saying is that when we originally discussed it, that we were just going to take 250 from this and the other 250 would come. Is that something, I mean, can we agree to do that?
Well, so technically we've received the funds, or at least half of them. And we,
It's not a funding being available. It's what the funding's been identified for.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
it's a little bit of a shift to take it from the impacted industries, what we have sitting in that bucket and available for impacted industries. And so, again, the other thing is, if the board just wants to take action and approve $500,000 for this project, you know, you could do that, and I could come up on you know, whether it's ARPA funds or if it's some other portion of the budget, or if there's something else, you know. there is a certain amount of risk and exposure with that because, you know, we were doing the solicitations for a reason. So then you're not getting like we were getting earlier last year, where everyone was emailing requests or submitting requests and how do we, I need funding and kind of having that organized.
Right.
If you want to do, you know, I mean, part of me would recommend just waiting on this action until you specifically are able to go through the exercise on the nonprofit and find out how much is actually available out of that, and then that gives me guidance on where the other portion of it. Because based on next week, if you make a decision and let's say we go free to 100,000, then we need to come up with 300,000 from somewhere else, or it's 250 and 250, because it sounds like there's, you know, Commissioner Kula's original concept was if approved here, they were on the list to get funded for 250. And so if we did this and then apply another 250 from somewhere else, I just want to make sure that the board has some flexibility for discussions next week.
There was some
Well-
immediacy to this.
Yeah, I mean, the deadline is the day after our meeting next week. So I guess I would be curious to know what they need from us. If it's simply a
Commitment.
letter,
Just a commitment, just the
Okay.
fact that we have, we made a motion, we passed the motion, and then we have made the commitment. They don't care where it comes from.
I know they don't. I'm just wondering if they're submitting a grant application or if they're
They're
doing
submitting,
something.
yeah, they're submitting an application, and if they can say that we have made a commitment to this.
So a day's notice is fine.
I,
They're gonna
I-
submit on the last day.
I wouldn't recommend waiting. I don't know that
I
that's,
just feel like that's kind
yeah, it's pushing it. You know,
of,
Well, Chair, I mean, I would just reiterate, I think that the simplest and cleanest thing to do then, if you don't want to wait, is to allocate 500,000 of the total 2.2 to Housing Authority and say, this is, you know, our commitment to this large impact nonprofit.
how does that position us for being able to move money, for instance, if we were to look at other, you know, other requests on this list that might benefit from or could be characterized from some of that other fund?
I wonder whether we could wait until we have that in front of us next week.
well, that's what I asked Carrie is,
Mhm.
can some of these people, like for the affordable housing, reapply for workforce housing bucket? And the answer was yes, they just might have to restructure their application.
right.
So I think it's probably more clear cut project for workforce housing. However, it's just a matter of, do we want to take a bigger chunk of this pie or split it?
I'm trying to avoid taking that much from this pot of money. Again, I don't want to add more complexity than we've already added to this process. So that's why I was asking Ken, but I'll go with the cleanest way. And then what I'm asking is if we could backfill, for instance, backfill 250 of that for something else that we earmark as, or we consider important, but could be considered funded from that other.
Well, technically, if you remember the original starting point, nonprofits, economic development, impacted industries, that's all in the same group. It's all part of the 6.8 million that was identified for those program areas. So if you want to approve $500,000, like Commissioner Kula was saying, and then you go through the exercise and then you still want to reduce one of the other categories, whether it's workforce development or if it's impacted industries, and you want to backfill into the nonprofits another 250,000 to make up for the $500,000 that was approved, you can do that.
I think that's along the same lines of what I was just thinking, at the risk of not trying to make it more complicated, but if the board agrees that you want this $500,000 to come out of ARPA funds, you're just not sure exactly which bucket of funds it's going to come from. I think the way it's worded in the agenda right now actually accomplishes that, because all it says is $500,000 of ARPA funds for this project.
Okay.
And then you could
And it
determine
clearly
which
meets
bucket
the
it comes
treasurer.
from at a later
Sure.
time, if you're all comfortable now that it's all going to be ARPA funds.
Yeah, that's, I think that's a really good point,
Yeah.
because it clearly meets the treasury guidance.
Right, but so what are we basing, what number are we basing our proposals for next week on? Are
Well,
we reducing 500?
we're back to the same question.
I think that'll be a discussion next
Yeah,
week.
that's, okay.
Well,
So give
there's,
some contingencies in there.
well, there's still $250,000 then that would inform what we're going to recommend for the others. So how do we go forward? That's a big number.
I think we just ultimately have to adjust the top level numbers. I think that's probably how we do that.
I think that'll be relatively easy to kind of sort out as far as that point from a funding standpoint. I just, I have concerns because I think now that we're approving funds outside of a solicitation process, that just be prepared. I think we're going to get more requests coming.
Mhm. Right.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Stara, would you like to make a motion and put this to bed?
I would move approval of item I3, consideration of approval of $500,000 Yamhill County American Rescue Plan Act ARPA Fund grant request for the Stratus Capital Project for the Housing Authority.
Thank you. Commissioner Starrett motions approval of item I3. Commissioners, any further discussion?
No, thank you.
No. Okay. All those in favor of approving item I3 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank
Vicky
you.
Weibargen is going to drop off of the attendees list at this point.
Oh my gosh.
She's probably just like so.
She's
over
going
this.
to do some work right now.
You guys.
Okay. Okay, item I4 is consideration of approval of an amendment to the 2016-2019 CBA between Yamhill County and Teamsters Local Union 223 to correct typographical errors in Article 13, Health and Welfare, retroactive to March 22nd, 2022. This is similar to last week's correction.
It is, it was my mistake. I should have included both the CBAs from 2016 through 19 and 2020 through 19 through 22 on last week's agenda, but it was only 19 through 22, so I had to go back this week and add the 16 through
The
19
16 through
CBA.
19, yeah.
Is it retroactive to then?
Same
that-
date.
Yeah.
Same date though? Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, Commissioners, do I have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve item I4.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Item I5, consideration approval of application materials for a grant from the Oregon Business Development Department, Oregon Brownfield Cleanup Fund in the amount of $200,000 to complete the remediation and cleanup of the former Carol Glover gas station located at 185 South Maple Street, Yamhill, Oregon. And
I love that it gets her name on it.
That's the way DEQ's been
I
referring to it, so I
know.
just,
I mean, I wouldn't want it to be
Yeah,
my name.
kidding.
That's all.
yeah.
So this is, so DEQ provided funding for the initial analysis. This is the next step in the process for the grant funds.
Right, this would be the grant from Business Development Department to complete the cleanup, hopefully, if they don't discover anything else unexpected when they pull the tanks out of the ground.
Dinosaur
But
boat.
as we've talked about before, our obligation, or the obligation for this cleanup would be limited to the amount of grant funds.
Okay. Commissioners, do I have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve item I5.
Okay.
Thank you,
Any-
Commissioner Starrett, for letting me do that one.
Any further discussion?
Okay.
Okay, excuse me. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
I'm gonna do an add-on, very quick discussion, I guess we can call it I6, of the DCI fire and emergency relocation needs. So we met out on the site yesterday morning and for a couple of hours almost, and spoke with our city partners in Newburgh, as well as the state. Secor was there to represent the family, the Spencer family from DCI. And so basically, they have an immediate relocation need for the 90 some employees that were in that facility. They are looking for, I believe, a minimum of 15,000 square feet, up to roughly 20,000 square feet. Zoned light industrial, and the discussion is, you know, if we can't find that, what options are on the table for potentially rezoning, maybe it's temporary, or finding a location that the county could help facilitate that immediate relocation. So the city of Newburgh is working on a solution with the former Rite Aid location. But I think if there is also some backburner options that we might be able to provide, that would be helpful for them. Because the longer that the time passes that they don't move into something, the more pressure it puts on the business to retain those employees. So they were clear about wanting to keep the location fairly close to McMinnville and Newburgh. That's where most of the employees live. So that they don't have additional gas costs to drive up to Sherwood or Salem or whatever. And so I've started to have some conversations. I'm sure you both have as well. So if there's something that we need to, I guess I want to open it up for discussion in terms of what we feel are the next steps that we can do to help prepare some options for them.
Chair, I just want to, talk a little bit about, obviously, the ideal thing would be to keep something at that very location. And knowing construction costs and knowing delay and all of that, I would recommend or to them, that they look at putting up a steel structure, and the implementation time is really pretty quick. From what I understand and some of the research that I've done is that something like that could be put up. They're very stable. They're very, can really do a lot of different functions. And so I would just say, if we can get that going, that would get that location back up and running. In the meantime, look for something else interim that's not quite so required that much retooling.
And yeah, Chair, I talked with family and Doug Rocks kind of about that, about staying on the site.
Yeah.
They're the most clear concern with that is that there's not really room for people to park because they still have what they're considering, not a crime site, but a site that needs to be maintained intact for evidence purposes. I do know that, but I think that's one that at least Doug Rocks at the city is still keeping in his mind too. And I think that having a temporary structure there makes a lot of sense. I walked around the Rite Aid site, and it's clear that they're at least moving forward with that. And you're right that there do need to be back burner solutions. I think there's a conversation with the folks who are coming up and own the mill site, that has a lot of complications as well. But it may be a matter of the county and county transit could look at the option of providing that ride share if offsite parking is the necessary thing, right? Like, forget about parking on the site, just focus on getting a structure up and then moving people in with the buses or whatever.
Okay.
So I sent, I communicated with Cynthia about like, hey, remember how you really wanted to do a ride share? Surprise.
Project.
And so there's a way for the county to kind of help facilitate it.
Okay. In speaking with the family, I followed up with them last night, and it's pretty clear that they would like to stay along Springbrook just because that's where all of their other facilities are.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the city working through some of their land use issues, I don't know that there's a role for us. If you can think of a role, certainly willing to help.
No.
But we just sort of let them work their process.
That's
Okay.
that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, in talking with Doug about it.
Okay. I did find another site outside of Yamhill, the city of Yamhill, that potentially would work. It's zoned heavy industrial, and I believe resource industrial. So if there's a situation where we could have a lesser use or less invasive use, I suppose is the term, that might work. The size would be appropriate. So we're working through some of those to have some back burner options. But I would just continue pushing on some of your ideas so that at least maybe next week we can come up with a list of, hey, this is what might work.
Yeah.
And let them
You have to keep pushing. That's the reality of it.
And the other thing along those lines is what is it that the county can do in terms of shoring up? Because the family has committed to continuing to pay these people going forward. And we don't know what the insurance implications are going to be, but they're committed to, you're talking about 90 people and some of them have only worked there. So I'm wondering if we can be looking at things that we could do if we had to do a sort of a workforce retention backfill. And I don't know where that would come from. And that's just another suggestion. The worst thing in the world would be if a lot of these folks just decided to go somewhere else and work because they just couldn't hang on and continue to pay them.
And I will say that in further discussions with the Spencers and with Tim Murphy, he was like, we can afford it. We just need the gears of bureaucracy to move as quickly as they are able to. And I appreciated hearing that because that's something that, it can be moved faster when there's pressure and grease applied.
Right. And the problem is that
Keep that going.
it's the Oregon land use laws that are making it so onerous. It's not anything we can turn around and do like that, or the city can turn around and do. It's some of those regulations.
Well, I'll be continuing to think and talk to folks as the economic development liaison. I'll try to pass things through, maybe through Abhishek, just
Yeah. And if there's anything that we need to act on, just bring forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
sounds good.
Okay. Let's see, item J, public hearings. We
And
have-
then Chair, I apologize that we don't necessarily need to take action on it, but we do have, if I could bring up a potential add-on or just raise your awareness of it, is that there's a hearing tonight to do the final approvals of the platting and the subdivision work in the streets, or I think it's called Crestview Crossing, which is the big development on the eastern edge of Newburgh, the northeastern edge of Newburgh. And as part of that, the proposal that the city has in front of them is to cut off Benjamin Road, which is a county road, cut off access to 99. That is it's a big decision, and Public Works looked at crash data at the request of ODOT, and it turns out that most of the crashes, most of the collisions, vast majority are people turning left out of Benjamin onto 99, as you can imagine, going across all of that traffic. So their request, Public Works request and public comment, because it is just a public comment to the city, is to allow it to continue to be open, but with a right turn in and a right turn out only. So it's a little bit of a wrinkle on it to maintain that access, right? I wanted to put it before you. I don't have a letter drafted that's like from the Board of Commissioners, but our Public Works staff has submitted public comment to that and agency comment. Something to consider is that if you do have time to put in your own thoughts to the city about that. It's a big change. So in my view, it does need to be taken in context of all the circulation patterns that happen there.
Yeah.
Because where would, if you're used to turning left there, where would all that traffic go? It would have to go the other.
Well, the Providence light is would be the
Next.
closest safe intersection, if that makes sense, which is about a quarter mile down. Because there's a traffic pattern that's created where if you're on Benjamin, you go down the street and then to the light.
Okay.
As opposed to on the 99 and then.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one. Public Works staff wanted to acknowledge that as long as it stays open, it becomes a cut through to Springbrook, I think. It's Springbrook. And that's actually used as a cut through at the moment, which people in the neighborhood abhor.
Yep.
So keeping that in context, that's why I was like, I'm gonna let public works staff provide their expert opinion, and then if you want to provide public comment, please. do.
And
Thank you.
that's tonight.
That's tonight.
Okay.
you.
And I just wanted to put onto our perhaps mental calendar, sorry, Ken, for adding more to it, is that the clerk did submit his resignation
Mhm.
last week. And I know that he expressed that he'd like us to move forward on an appointment process for that period of time between when he's gone and when there's a new clerk. So I just wanted to put this out there that I would appreciate a conversation at a later date
Yeah.
about what we would like to do with the board.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say that that's something that's going to be a very involved conversation and that we would need to have some of the options so that we don't just
Yeah.
come in and start discussing that we know that you can do this, this, and this, and then go forward. with
Would
that.
it work, would it be appropriate to have as a work session?
You could certainly set it up that way if you
Hey,
wanted to.
Yeah, I think we talked about that.
I guess at this point, because we're talking about it here at formal session, an open record is, again, you've heard it over and over again from me, but we do have a chief deputy clerk, and for the benefit of the public, that's why we have a chief deputy clerk, that in the event that that position is absent or vacant, the staff there in the building are prepared to assume the responsibilities and can execute the responsibilities of the clerk.
By statute, it falls to the chief deputy.
Correct.
Yeah, they
And
shall do
so
that.
Carrie Hinton is currently the chief deputy clerk, and she is currently working very closely with the clerk to download, because again, even as the chief deputy, you might not be getting everything. So she's in the process of working very closely with Brian, and again, Brian is still our clerk until June 30th. And so I know there's statutory language around appointing. And Christian, do you want to talk about, as soon as the position goes vacant, what the next steps are going to look like?
I mean, we can do that now, or we'd be prepared to talk about it.
I was
when the
just
board had it
proposing,
scheduled too. We've got
Yeah.
all that information available.
but I appreciate, sorry, Chair, I appreciate that, we have a clerk
Mhm.
and we have a chief deputy clerk, and that, I think that's really important.
Yep.
I have full confidence in our primary, for example, and I want to make sure that we're
And I'd also be
gonna get something
remiss,
on the schedule for later.
and my apologies for interrupting, but I'd also be remiss if I didn't also highlight that we also have a dedicated team of staff that also works with Carrie in that office, that are also prepared to, continue doing what they're doing and provide the services from that office. I know it's not without its challenges for Brian to resign at this point, but staff is prepared, and I just want to make sure, because I know there's questions that have been raised in the past on how we're going to proceed moving forward, and that's why I think it's important, if we're going to talk about it here, to highlight we do have a plan.
Yep.
We do have a chief deputy. We do have a dedicated team that works in that building, and we're going to make sure that we continue to keep things operating in the clerk's office.
And we have a clerk
And we have a
Through-
clerk
June 30th.
Right.
through June 30th.
Right, the vacancy wouldn't occur till for that date.
Correct.
At least
Right.
until that date.
So I would appreciate the time to follow up with Brian, because I have a few questions after that initial discussion. So when are you thinking we'd sort of have this?
I mean, I don't think we
Larger
need to have
discussion.
it even in, within the month. And
Okay.
perhaps we even wait until after the May primary, so that it's a clear, like, I don't want there being any muddling, right? But how about after that?
Well, I don't think there, as Ken mentioned, I don't think there's any question about the fact that we have a clerk and
Yeah.
we have a deputy clerk who assumes the position of the clerk. And there's nothing more to, nothing more to decide at this point.
Right.
And that wouldn't be to complete the current term of the clerk, because again, that's why I was kind of throwing it to
Well,
Kristen
I
just
mean,
to
yeah, but
highlight.
if you want to get into some of the options, we certainly can.
Well, no,
They
I'm just
will-
saying,
the
it's
chief
going,
dep- Yeah.
it's going to be on the November ballot,
Mhm.
the vacancy.
Right.
And so, you know, so we're really looking at, as far as the coverage goes, is from July 1 to the first Monday in January is what we're talking about. Sorry.
So if we
And I'm
wait,
sorry, I didn't mean to.
well, if we wait till, you know, maybe the first of the month of June.
Yeah.
So which technically it's the second. To get through the primary and then kind of reset how we're gonna address him leaving at the end of the month and then going forward. I think that would be good. Okay, so we'll plan on
Sounds
that
great.
discussion for June 2nd.
And there'll probably be discussions on May 2nd or 3rd when he's doing his budget presentation.
Right.
So,
He will have a budget that involves that. Okay, thank you. It seemed funny to do it in announcements, so I wanted to make sure we had that.
Well, I didn't even get to announcements. We were still. up.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Okay, so technically announcements. Follow up on the Secretary of State letter that we sent regarding ballots that would be returned this December. They, the Secretary of State's office acknowledged that. County Clerk Brian Van Bergen had a phone call with all of the clerks across the state, as well as the post office and the elections division. And they had some, you know, kind of frank conversations about the concerns going into the primary. And it seems like at this point, Montgomery County has decided to test the process. So they are running some test ballots through to make sure that they can identify if it's, you know, if it's human error or if it's machines or whatever. So they're very much aware of it. It's on their radar and they are actively working to make sure that we don't have issues in the primary. So they were grateful to hear from us. Real quick, this week is National Public Safety Telecommuters. No, not telecommuters, but telecommunicators. They call them the headset heroes, which I think is really cute. But we just want to honor our dispatchers, YCOM, and the wonderful work that they do. You know, they're the first ones to interface with the public in times of emergency and oftentimes overlooked in terms of recognition. So I did want to acknowledge them and their wonderful work. So, Commissioners, further announcements?
I just have a road safety tour tomorrow at 9 a.m. And water task force meeting April 25th at the City of the Antelope Council Chambers. And you're welcome to attend in person. There is a Zoom option. And then the wildfire education workshops.
Sounds good. Anything else to put on the good of the order?
I may have, probably should have mentioned this during calendaring, but we are tentatively scheduled to have an executive session immediately following formal session next week.
Yes.
Just a reminder in terms of setting the agenda, keep that in mind, and that could be relatively lengthy. We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Okay, yes, scheduled for tentatively for noon.
Yeah, all depends on when. When formal wraps up.
So
Commissioner meeting.
Yeah.
on the same date as our nonprofit discussion. Okay. So if there's nothing else, wish everyone a happy Easter this weekend and have a wonderful safe weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.